Welcome to the Planning Commission meeting of Monday, March 25th, 2024. I now call the meeting to order. If we could all stand, we'll say the Pledge of Allegiance together. We begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you very much. Anna, roll call, please.
Chair Arith.
Present.
Vice Chair Toller.
Here.
Commissioner Rojas.
Present.
Commissioner Zick is absent. Commissioner Andrade.
Here.
Commissioner Bavar.
Present.
Commissioner Klepak is absent.
All right, thank you. I see no announcements or presentations this evening, which brings us to public comments for matters that are not listed on tonight's agenda. So if you wish to speak and you're in chambers, you're welcome to come to either podium. You'll have 3 minutes, and at the 1 minute mark, you'll hear a little chime, and then it'll cut off automatically. So we'll start with you, ma'am. Ms. Ida Wolf.
Thank you.
Yeah,
You remembered.
I do.
Listen, I have done quite a bit of work since I heard that you wanted to build on our parking lot for the senior center. I have these papers that I'd like passed out to the board if I could. And our senior center is for a place for moms and dads. There's not enough parking place in there for us, let alone bring in more. Now, where there's some good land that is open is at the end of Superior, there by Pacific Coast. They could build their own development in there, and it's just all open land. And that's Howard Hughes's land. I knew Howard Hughes. I know all the money you're making off of a dead man that didn't give you the property. And that senior center was Howard Hughes's. And the seniors say no to that. If you want to use a parking lot, go to churches, because they're only there on Sunday. And you could build up, let them park under. But we don't want the dogs, because it will smell like dog piss and shit when the wind blows, mixed with marijuana. No, we don't want that in our parking lot. And let's see. That's it. And I am on top of it. And the place across the street, I forget the name of it, the big tower, the towers, they don't have enough parking for their people. Their people come over and eat with us, and they don't have, they're waiting for parking places. So they don't have parking places.
All right, thank you, Ms. Wolf. Mr. Humphreys.
Good evening, Commission. Jay Humphrey, Costa Mesa resident. Recently, the City Council passed a revision to the ordinance on how you guys deal with cannabis processes. My comments tonight have nothing to do with this evening's item, but it has to do with the CUPs on the land that have been generated per their applications and everything else. My concern is that while they, in fact, made a limit of 10 total cannabis stores in the future when all these other ones failed down the road, somewhat different than you guys wanted at 15, which is the policy process, and I'm good with the 10. The problem is we're never going to get to the 10 for one simple reason. As long as the CUP exists on the land, somebody who already is a holder here in Costa Mesa could then go and open that store up also, because the CUP runs with the land. And the only way for that to go away is for there to be a specific stop to the CUP triggered by some mechanism or by somebody. Something has to happen that way. And I would ask that you guys would set up some way to the city to say, guys, you need to have an absolute trigger for the removal of the CUP, otherwise you never get to the 10. So you need to have a trigger that closes that CUP down ultimately, so that that property now no longer has a cannabis CUP. If your goal is actually to get 10, ultimately. If your goal is to get 50, then you don't want to shut it down. So I believe you guys have a goal to get it down into that range also. So I would recommend that you find and generate a specific trigger to remove the CUP as opposed to a maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't happen after they've gone out of business and everybody else thinks about it. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Jay. Yes, ma'am.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'd like to just talk about the cannabis stores that are popping up everywhere on Newport Boulevard.
If it's a general comment, sure. If it's specifically about the one item we're hearing this evening, then we'll have to hold off.
Then do we hold off and talk about it later?
If it's a general comment about retail cannabis, you're welcome to make it now. But if it's specifically about the item that we're hearing this evening, about a retail cannabis site, then I would recommend that you wait till later.
Tonight?
Yes, ma'am.
Lovely. Thank you for your
Okay,
time.
sure. Anyone else in chambers wish to speak on items that are not listed on tonight's agenda? We'll get to the public comment for items that are listed on the agenda later. And it should be in the back in the racks. Yes, sir.
I don't know if this is on the agenda or not, but this is in reference to the cannabis store that's proposed for 2490 Newport Boulevard.
Yeah, that's tonight. So later, when we get to that, we'll open it up for public comments specifically for that item. All right, thank you, sir. All right, anyone else in chambers wish to speak? All right, seeing none. Anna, if we go on to Zoom first, do we have anyone?
No, there's not, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, how about telephone?
No, there's not.
All right, thank you. We'll go ahead and close public comments and turn it over to my colleagues up here for commissioner comments and suggestions, starting with Commissioner Rojas.
I have no comments. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. Commissioner Andrade. All right, Commissioner Vivar.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank the public for being here tonight, and always great to have public participation. And to those who observe Holy Week this week, have a great week. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. Vice Chair.
Sure, thank you. I'll be quick. Thanks everybody for coming. We had a Strong Towns event last week. So if you haven't heard of Strong Towns, I encourage you to go to strongtowns.org. They've been around for about 10 years. They advocate for a specific approach to the way we run our cities, and it's an approach that I try to adopt in my work up here. There's a Strong Towns local chapter, so it's a Orange County chapter of Strong Towns. The founder of Strong Towns, Chuck Marone, he's been to Costa Mesa several times and has spoken. And I just want to say we had a great time at Green Cheek a few nights ago. There were about 50 people that showed up from all over Orange County that are interested in building our cities, running our cities in a better way. And he let out a statement, since this is an election year, and I wanted to read it. It speaks to the power that I think this organization has, in that it's nonpartisan and it brings everybody together towards common purposes at a local level. So he said, as we enter another election year, here is the promise I make to you. Strong Towns will always remain focused on our core issues: housing, street safety, eliminating highway expansions, reducing parking, accessible local accounting, period. If we want to truly restore prosperity across North America, we can't be divided by election year political battles. Every town or city urgently needs to address the housing crisis, the traffic fatality epidemic, and the infrastructure time bomb driving municipalities to insolvency. Thankfully, the Strong Towns mission garners widespread support across all of the usual divides. That's especially important now. We're committed to working across divides. So I'd encourage everybody to look into Strong Towns media and bring that approach to City Hall. That's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Vice Chair. I appreciate it. I have no comments this evening, so we'll go ahead and move on to the consent calendar. I see that we have one consent calendar item tonight. All matters listed under the consent calendar are considered to be routine and will be acted upon in one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless members of the Planning Commission, staff, or the public request specific items to be discussed and or removed from the consent calendar for discussion. Items removed from the consent calendar will be discussed and voted upon immediately following Planning Commission action on the remainder of the consent calendar. If you would, Anna, please read the title of the consent calendar item.
Consent calendar item number 1, February 26, 2024, unofficial meeting minutes.
All right, thank you. Colleagues, do you have any comments on the minutes? All right, seeing none, may I have a motion, please? Was your motion, if you can hit it one more time, Commissioner Vivar. Was your motion, Commissioner?
Approve the minutes as is?
All right, I'll go ahead and second that. Any comments?
No, sir.
All right, me neither. If we can call the question.
That motion carries 5-0.
All right, thank you, Anna. This brings us to our public hearings. We have one public hearing item tonight, and Anna, if you'd please read the title for public hearing item number 1.
Public hearing item number 1, planning application 22-08 for a retail cannabis storefront business with delivery located at 2490 Newport Boulevard, Newport Wellness. Please note we have received public comments on this item that have been provided to the commission and made a part of the record. This is a call for any ex parte communications.
All right, thanks, Anna. I'll go ahead and start to my left. Commissioner Vivar.
Yes, I held a short phone call this afternoon with someone by the name of Kate Klimau, who sent an email to the Planning Commission regarding tonight's agenda. And I also attempted to reach out to the applicant's representative. I believe his name was Scott something, but I was not able to make contact with him. But that's the extent of my ex parte.
All right, thank you, sir. Commissioner Rojas.
I have none.
Okay, thank you, sir. Commissioner Andrade.
None.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Vice Chair.
None.
Okay. I, too, spoke with Kate Klimau for about 10 minutes today on the heels of an email that I believe most of us, if not all of us, received on behalf of the HOA that she was representing as a board member. Before that, I also received an email from local attorney Alexander Haberbush to discuss, who wanted to discuss generally East Side concentration of cannabis retailers, and there's a little bit of back and forth there via email, but nothing substantive or worth noting publicly. And that's all I have to report. So I'll now turn it over to Ms. Halligan to present on the item. Ms. Halligan.
Good evening, Chair Areth and Commission. I'm Michelle Halligan, Senior Planner with the Economic and Development Services Department. The item before you is a request for a conditional use permit to establish a retail cannabis storefront known as Newport Wellness. To date, the city has issued 22 CUPs for retail cannabis storefronts. There are currently 10 operating. There are also 12 approved CUPs that are in plan check or under construction, shown in purple. The item before you tonight is highlighted in blue. The applicant successfully completed the initial steps, including a pre-application and cannabis business permit application. If the CUP is approved tonight, the applicant would next apply for building permits. The proposed storefront would be located at 2490 Newport Boulevard. Some dilapidated commercial structures would be removed, which would leave an approximately 2,000 square foot commercial space for the cannabis storefront. The subject property is zoned C1, Local Business District. There are other commercially zoned properties to the south and east. Residentially zoned properties are located across Monte Vista Avenue and down Monte Vista Avenue. The property to the west contains right-of-ways, Newport Boulevard, and State Route 55. Here is a photo of the existing conditions as viewed from Newport Boulevard. Records indicate that the property was developed in the 1950s, perhaps earlier, with a commercial building and 2 residential units. The previous commercial tenants have relocated elsewhere in Costa Mesa. The 2 residential units and tenants remain. The existing development and residential use are legal nonconforming. The site has been occupied with commercial and residential uses simultaneously for over 60 years. The applicant proposes significant improvements, including removing non-conforming parking from the front setback and side setback. A parking lot that meets the city's design standards would be constructed. The proposed parking would be short by one residential guest space. However, the residential use and parking are legal non-conforming and allowed to continue as such. Other site improvements include adding a trash enclosure, replacing perimeter walls and fencing, as well as constructing new sidewalk, curb, and gutter. The applicant proposes to bring the commercial building up to current building codes, redesign the facade with new finishes, windows, doors, and marquee awnings. Other exterior improvements include creating a parking lot, adding a bicycle rack to encourage multimodal transportation, installing higher screening for air conditioning and other equipment, adding landscape planters, including at least 5 24-inch box-sized trees, replacing the chain link fencing with high-quality materials, adding new security lighting as well. If the CUP is approved, a fence would be constructed between the commercial and residential areas to create distinguished areas. This is the proposed floor plan. The retail sales area, shown in green, includes a lobby where customers would have their identification and age verified. The red areas of the building are access controlled, meaning that only employees with proper security clearance are allowed to be in these spaces. The facility has one customer entrance fronting Newport Boulevard and one customer exit fronting Monte Vista Avenue. A limited access door is located in the rear of the building facing the parking lot. Vendors would only be able to distribute products through the access control door when accompanied by a staff member with the proper security clearance. All product loading and unloading would take place under video surveillance by the limited access door. The applicant provided a detailed business plan that was evaluated by the city's cannabis consultant. It is not attached to the staff report as it contains proprietary details. Some of the topics covered include professional experience, pro forma, and day-to-day operations. The applicant also provided a professionally prepared security plan that was reviewed by the city's cannabis consultant. They determined that appropriate security measures were taken to address both city and state requirements. There are more than 45 standard conditions of approval related to Measure Q retail storefront uses. Some of the conditions include odor control, parking management, age restrictions for customers and employees, and a permit renewal process every 2 years. There are also site-specific conditions of approval to ensure compatibility, such as posting signs in the parking lot to remind customers to use consideration, reducing the hours the exterior trash enclosure can be used, requiring an employee to monitor the parking lot, and requiring a detailed photometric study to reduce lighting impacts on residential units. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission adopt a resolution to find that the project is categorically exempt from the provisions of the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, per CEQA guidelines, section 15301, class 1, existing facilities, and approve planning application 22-08, subject to conditions of approval and code requirements. This concludes staff's presentation. The applicant is available, and they have also prepared a presentation. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Halligan. Colleagues, do you have any questions for staff on this item? Commissioner Vuvar.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Halligan, for your presentation. I have a few questions. So when I was reading the applicant letter, they mentioned something about units A, B, and C, but then in other parts of the application, I've read that the 2 units are being combined to be 1 unit. So is this existing building 3 units or 2 units? I'm a little confused.
Thank you, Commissioner Vivar. Based on city records, it appears that it was intended to be 2 units, but over time, it's been utilized as 3. Present-day condition appears to be 2 units. When staff visited the site on multiple occasions, I was unable to enter, but it looks like over time, the configuration has changed, perhaps without permits.
Okay. And as for the trash enclosure that's going to be constructed, is that trash enclosure meant to be for only the use of, in this case, the proposed retail cannabis dispensary, or the cannabis storefront and the 2 apartment units?
Commissioner Vivar, our intention was to require the cannabis applicant to construct that trash enclosure as it's necessary for the commercial use. It would be up to them and the tenants as to whether allow co-use. And just a note that cannabis waste cannot be put in that receptacle. It has to be put into a specific container and then removed from the property by a licensed company.
Right, okay. And I think my final question, at least from what I can, my little list of questions that I can remember at the moment. So the language regarding the approval for basically any cannabis storefront that we look at mentions adequate security lighting and making sure that nearby residential areas are not being impacted by light. But as the staff report mentions that there's only about a 10-foot separation between the proposed storefront and the existing apartment units. How does staff, I guess, reconcile having security lighting while also not impacting the tenants of those residential units with light at such close proximity?
Commissioner Vivar, I share your concerns. So this photometric study is draft, and when staff reviewed it, I identified that additional shielding and a different lighting fixture would be required. But I didn't want to have them go back and redo the study, given that we don't know if it will be approved. If the CUP is approved tonight, they would be instructed to go and make those changes. We would also be conditioning the project to include a new 6-foot-tall fence to help decrease those impacts. But there's a lot that we can do with the type of lighting fixture as well as shielding.
And regarding that fence, would that be something like a wrought iron fence that staff was intending?
So that's up for discussion with the applicant, and they're also in communication with the tenant. So I think it'd be more of a collaborative process.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Ms. Halligan. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Vivar. Commissioner Rojas.
Yeah, just a quick question for you, because it's a little unclear to me, and I wish I had time to drive the property, but I didn't. I'm seeing what it currently is as far as the configuration of the property, but is the property currently vacant, or is there a business running in there?
Commissioner Rojas, there were 2 businesses in the commercial building. They have since relocated elsewhere in Costa Mesa. The 2 residential units are still occupied, and the intent is for them to continue to be occupied.
Understood. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir. Vice Chair.
I just want to confirm, maybe for the sake of everybody else here too, there was a city council meeting where they discussed this last Tuesday, where there were some changes made to the ordinance. But this item that we're voting on tonight, we're voting based on the existing original ordinance, not any changes that have been made in the last week. Is that correct?
Commissioner Toller, that is correct. Staff has received direction from City Council to revise some amendments, but the first reading actually has not happened, and they may submit other revisions as well. So tonight we are reviewing a project that's based on our adopted code.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Vice Chair. Anyone else? All right. I'll go ahead and jump in. Staff, if you'd please turn to page 13 of the agenda. If you look at the last bullet point, right before you get to the general plan conformance section, it says person monitoring the parking lot is there to, quote, ensure that customers are quiet, turn off vehicle engines promptly, do not play loud music, and this is what I underlined, and generally do not create excessive neighbor disturbances. I'll say before you jump in to respond about that, I've noticed that some of the language has changed since the last cannabis item that we read. So I'm noticing some changes along the way. And I don't think I've ever read that before. I was curious to know what general neighbor disturbances are versus particular, or specific disturbances versus general disturbances.
Chair Arith, I believe that was added as these, one of the housing units is only, 10 feet away. And we have had actually other properties obtain their CUPs that are only 12 feet away, but I didn't work on those projects. So as I'm working through this, I'm looking for ways to make improvements, and knowing that in the future, a condition of approval for security guards overnight could be removed, we're looking for other ways to make sure that we can have compatibility between the uses. But to date, the reports to the police and to code enforcement don't indicate significant reports of disturbance of the peace and so on.
All right, thank you. If we turn the page to page 14 and we look under the consistency finding under land use policy 1.1, it says at the end of that consistency finding that CU applications in progress or applications in the CBP phase are located within close proximity of the subject property. I think I was just generally curious to know why we would put that in. And I'll read the full sentence there at the end of that finding. Although there are other cannabis storefronts in Costa Mesa, none of the approved cannabis storefront CUPs, CUP applications in progress, or applications in the CBP phase are located within close proximity of the subject property. I think I was a little bit curious to know why that would even be relevant given where the current ordinance is.
Chair Arith, we've received feedback from the community time and time again about concentration, including specific to this project. So I thought it was important to point out that relatively speaking, this is over 1,000 feet away from other applications.
Okay. Yeah, I won't harp on it, Ms. Halligan. I just wanted to point it out that as far as a finding goes, distance has never really, anyway, I'll move on. If we turn to page 16, and we look at the last sentence right before you get to the bullet point of granting the conditional use permit, it says staff does not anticipate that the proposed use as proposed and conditioned would be materially detrimental to properties in the area. And I know that we've talked about this before, but just for the, conversation with the public here, how do we make that determination as to whether or not the proposed use would be materially detrimental to the local area?
When staff's evaluating a project, we're looking at our codes. We're looking for consistency with the general plan and with other uses. Here in Costa Mesa, we have a land use pattern that shows that commercial and residential uses can coexist, especially on this site of Newport Boulevard, where we have a general plan designation of commercial residential. These are areas where historically commercial and residential uses have coincided. We also have 10 operating cannabis storefronts, and to date we don't have any data that suggests that they can't exist side by side. It's also, data provided by other cities as well, but it's something that we're going to be looking into and tracking as our cannabis storefronts, as they operate for longer periods of time.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Halligan. If we turn the next page, page 17, and we look at the bottom of the environmental determination right before we get to the alternatives section. Last sentence, it's discussing cumulative impact of environmental circumstances, and that it's written here that it is not located on a hazardous site or location. And I was trying to think of the previous use there. And what I found typically is, where cars may have been worked on, there may be remediation on site due to oil or to gas or to some other chemical that may have spilled over a long duration of time on the site. Have we determined through an EIS, and probably less likely an EIR, that soil testing will be required if this project moves forward? And exactly, I guess specifically, how do we know that it's not located on a hazardous site? Is that only because there's no data to support that at the moment?
Chair Arith, we have a few resources that we use. One is the California Water Resources Board. This is not a site that's listed, and they have been tracking sites in Costa Mesa for a long time. We also look at the Cal Enviro screen, and this is also not a dump or a site of concern. But moving forward, a phase one site assessment might be something to discuss if warranted.
Yeah. Okay. I'll make a note of that. Thank you, Ms. Halligan. Let me just continue to turn pages. We found a lot of interest in this item. Moving into the conditions of approval sections. Page 16 of the conditions of approval. Under operational conditions, it's operational condition number 8. It states, while working, employees shall not park on residential streets unless doing so temporarily to make a cannabis delivery. If I remember correctly, in the applicant letter, they stated that there was substantial on-site parking to where off-site parking would not be required. So I don't know why we're making this particular finding in the conditions of approval to say employees shall not park on residential streets unless doing so temporarily to make a cannabis delivery when the applicant is saying that they can hold all that parking on site. So I just wanted to better understand that.
Chair Arith, that's one of our standard conditions of approval for all cannabis storefronts. It came about in the beginning when we had some applications that were up against residential properties at an intersection in which there wasn't any street parking, and in response to public feedback. But you will find that condition of approval for all of our cannabis storefronts, regardless of their location now.
Okay, all right, thank you, Ms. Halligan. Let's see. We have some questions for the applicant later on. All right, and I think that's it for now. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Anyone else want a second bite? Commissioner Andrade.
Yeah, I would really appreciate Ms. Halligan. Can you take us back to the map of approved sites in your presentation? Just looking through the public comments, just want to make sure that everyone's aware of what's actually been approved and what's in the pipeline thus far. So there is, and just to clarify, there's 10 of the green operating. Overall, however, there's up to 12 that have been approved. So some of these are not open yet, right? Some of the purples, basically not open.
Commissioner Andrade, those shown in purple are either in plan check or under construction.
Mm-hmm. Right. So right now, like for example, from the community perspective, they can only see the green ones, which are up and running. Purple are forthcoming. And then the new one, 2940s, up north. Great. Thank you so much.
Is that all, Commissioner? Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you very much. Unless anyone else wants to jump in, move things along. I will now open the public hearing and ask the applicant or the applicant's representative to come forward. And if you would, please state your name for the record. Let us know if you've read the report and if you agree to the conditions.
My name is Sean Maddox. I have read the report and do agree with the conditions. I'm here also on behalf of Newport Wellness with Keith Scott, one of the owners.
All right, thank you very much. The floor is yours if you'd like to make a brief presentation.
Thank you, Chair Arith, and commissioners for having me tonight. As mentioned, my name is Sean Maddox. I'm here on behalf of Newport Wellness. I'd like to thank Michelle for her thorough staff report, as well as for staff's recommendation. Newport Wellness LLC is conceived as a premium cannabis purveyor. This site would offer the owners an opportunity to be a vertically integrated cannabis company. They currently have licenses in Santa Ana, California, which include both a commercial distributor as well as a manufacturing license. The proposed operations here would be for retail storefront and delivery, which would give them a retail outlet for their current operations in Santa Ana. Next slide, please. The next There we go. Next slide is just a general floor plan and site layout. Michelle went through this pretty well in the staff report, but on the left is the floor plan. As you'll see, there's a secure lobby which enters into the retail area. There's also a secure office and vault off of the lobby, as well as secure product storage in the back. Secure product storage in the back is near the secured parking lot, which would allow us to have secure vendor deliveries throughout hours of operations with predetermined delivery schedules for any incoming vendors. I think of note is the overall site plan on the right here. As was mentioned, the contemplated improvements to the site would remove 2 unpermitted structures off of Monte Vista Avenue. It would create conforming parking as compared to the currently non-conforming parking off of Newport Boulevard. It also contemplates vast site improvements, including brand new landscaping off of Newport Boulevard, repaving of sidewalks on both Newport Boulevard as well as Monte Vista. The site creates 11 conforming parking spaces within the site. It also adds bike racks for alternative modes of transportation for customers and staff as well. I'm going to ask you to go to the next slide, and then I'm going to hand it over to Keith to talk to a little bit about the ownership team and their experience.
Thank you. As Sean said, my name is Keith Scott. I'm part of the ownership team, along with Keith Scott Sr. and Steve Woodson. Collectively, the 3 of us are all Orange County residents and have been residents for the last 20 plus years. Myself, I'm a resident of Costa Mesa for the last 5 years. Our business background comes from the tobacco and hemp space. We manufacture and distribute cigar wraps and hemp wraps. Keith Sr. and Steve Woodson started the company in 1995 and have been running it successfully for the last 30 years. Myself, I have been involved in the last 7. We employ 20 plus employees in the city of Irvine for sales, marketing, and accounting, 2 employees in the city of Lake Forest, and 250 plus employees in Tijuana, Mexico for manufacturing. With the complex business operations, we also deal with state and local government agencies. Some of those include the TTB, U.S. Customs, and the FDA. As Sean said, we stepped into the cannabis space about 6 years ago. We have a manufacturing and distribution license in the city of Santa Ana, where we employ 7 employees. We make a line of craft cannabis pre-rolls there. We are in about 40 stores throughout the state. And this opportunity, with that said, we're happy to present this retail opportunity from the Planning Commission, as it'd be our first flagship store to host our brand and other craft brands throughout Southern California. And we specifically picked the city of Costa Mesa and have been involved in the last 3 years, as we are eager to open something that's in our own backyard and in our community. Thanks.
Thanks, Keith. Perhaps the most important slide of today is community integration and security. One thing I want to note is that as we came into this project, we did reach out to all neighbors within 600 feet of the location. We held a pre-CUP open house on the site. Letters were sent to everybody who also got notices for tonight's hearing. We had a decent turnout, about 6 to 10 members from the community, including the 2 current residents that are from the site. What we saw was everybody was overwhelmingly in support of the project, and a lot of the comments went into the general conditions of the area and neighborhood right now. The residents spoke about repeated break-ins from homelessness and vagrancy within the area, vandalism. We actually had a neighbor come with his 2 adult children to the site who was overwhelmingly in support because he said that there had been vandalisms and break-in throughout Monte Vista with cars that would drive from Newport Boulevard up Monte Vista, do some kind of smash and grab type of robberies of those homes and the neighborhood, and then just drive off. And he said, you know, amongst other things, he asked us about our security and surveillance, and I did mention license plate reading capabilities and things of that nature, which were, you know, huge selling points to him, because having a 24-hour security presence in an area that's already, subject to nuisances regarding crime and vagrancy seemed like a huge upshot to him. More about our just general outreach and neighborhood integration. If approved, the store would have employee volunteer participation in local organizations. We'd also focus on local hiring with the expectation of $300,000 to $500,000 a year in local jobs. We'd become a member of the local Chamber of Commerce, and then we'd have on-site workshops and events. Our nuisance mitigation, I think, is extremely important when you look at the surrounding area. We do have a comprehensive odor control plan, and I know something that Chair Arith was mentioning is kind of a traffic control plan and making sure that parking is adequate. That's something that we're willing to work with staff and neighbors to ensure. We don't foresee there being any impact on the surrounding parking, but we'd be willing to do things like off-site parking if that were something that was brought up through our operations over the first couple months, 6 months. We'd be happy to come back in front of the commission to work with our neighbors to discuss those things to make sure that we're upholding our good neighbor policies. Another thing is a 24/7 community liaison. Keith is the scapegoat here. He's a local resident of Costa Mesa, so he would be the one who'd be on the hook. He'd be responsive to any neighbors, any city staff members, or anything along those lines if there are any complaints or any issues with the operations. So we would have somebody who's local, part of the community, who could immediately respond to any issues, although we do believe that with the plans in place that we wouldn't expect any issues. Lastly is security and safety. I think it's extremely important. We've seen a lot of these operators open throughout Costa Mesa. I've been part of those projects. I will say to date, I think it was Jim Fitzpatrick pulled a public report recently about the crime incidents at these and any, I think, general nuisances from the cannabis operators. And there's been little to none so far with the 10 operating cannabis dispensaries. I know it's a common conception or misconception that cannabis is going to attract crime, but most studies actually say the opposite, that the increased security of a licensed cannabis operator tends to deter crime. With that being said, we plan to work with Eudora Enterprises, who's been servicing the cannabis industry for over 7 years. He's got operations in Santa Ana as well as Costa Mesa that he oversees. We'd have 2 part-time and 2 full-time guards. We'd have 24-hour security. I know that the city's considering pulling back on those requirements, but I think that's something that we'd want to talk with the commissioners as well as our neighbors on what they saw fit through the duration of our operations. If approved, whether or not we'd pull back. As of now, our plan would be to have 24-hour security regardless of the current ordinance. And then something mentioned earlier is just general surveillance. We'd have 24-hour site surveillance on top of security. This would be exteriorly monitored surveillance during hours of non-operations. That would include facial recognition capability as well as license plate readers. These are the types of things that we've seen other stores in the past actually serve to help with surrounding crime. I've worked with a client who's actually had their videotape subpoenaed to provide license plates and things of that nature to assist with criminal activity in surrounding neighborhoods. So we do see these as a general benefit to the surrounding community. Overall, we understand that we're, in an area that would require sensitive operations. We're willing and open to being as collaborative as possible with our neighbors to ensure that we're being good neighbors if approved tonight. With that being said, thank you, commissioners and Chair Arith, for having us. I'm here to answer any questions you guys have, as well as anything that the public may have about this project.
All right, thank you, Mr. Maddox. Just so you know, I've really come to enjoy your presentations up there, so it's nice to see you again. And Mr. Scott, thank you for jumping in as well. I'll turn it over to my colleague, starting with Commissioner Vivar, if you have any questions.
Yes, sir. And Mr. Maddox, thank you for being here for your presentation. So you mentioned that there was outreach to the community. So would you be able to provide me with an exact date of when you contacted the neighbors and an exact date of when you held the open house event that you mentioned?
I don't have the January 4th. We reached out 2 weeks ahead. We sent mailers in both English and Spanish to all surrounding. We use the same mailing list that the city uses for their noticing.
Okay. And the reason I ask is that I in my conversation with the person I mentioned during my ex parte communications, Kate, mentioned that the notifications were sent out on January 1st, and the meeting happened on January 3rd. So the date of the meeting sounds about right from what I heard, but I am just concerned that if in fact the turnaround time was not 2 weeks, but rather a shorter time period, then I would understand why residents would be now coming here tonight to kind of share their concerns about this. And who was present at that meeting? Was that yourself, Mr. Maddox, or?
Myself and all three owners were there. And to that point, Commissioner Vivar, mailing processes take a while, so I know the process was started at least 2 weeks before. I don't know the exact dates of when neighbors received them, but I will also say that emails as well as phone numbers of owners were provided on those mailers, and we haven't heard one response from any surrounding neighbors in the now 2.5 months since those mailers were sent out. So I understand and appreciate your response about maybe proximity. I do know that efforts were made and that multiple neighbors did show up. But as always, it's our intention to be a good neighbor and to be collaborative and to address items that may be concerns to the public.
Right.
And I'd say, as it was open for the past 2 months, our phones and emails will continue to be open, depending on the outcome of tonight's meeting.
Right. And as for communications, I guess my final question here would be then, did you also reach out to the HOA of that townhouse group that provided public comment tonight?
We reached out to the approved owners and tenants within proximity. So if that HOA had an address listed within proximity, they would have received notice.
Okay.
Presumably with multiple members who did receive notice, they would have had constructive notice from those members as well.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Mr. Maddox, and I turn it back to you, Chair.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. Anyone else? All right. I'll go ahead and ask a couple questions, Mr. Maddox and Mr. Scott. Thank you again for your time. Let me just read. I'm gonna be referencing your applicant letter, attachment number 2, if you'd like to take a look. I mentioned earlier to Ms. Halligan about condition of approval on page 16. I don't think we need to retread that at this point. In the third paragraph about in the middle, it says a robust security measures to help remedy the ongoing issues with unhoused individuals in the surrounding neighborhood. I just wanted to know, let me actually read the full sentence just to give some context. The proposed site improvements include a complete facade rehabilitation, removal of unpermitted structures on the site, elimination of non-compliant parking off of Newport Boulevard, and robust security measures to help remedy the ongoing issues with unhoused individuals in the surrounding neighborhood. And I think it's to that last point that I was kind of curious to know what the ongoing issues are with unhoused individuals within this neighborhood and how this project would specifically help on that front.
Well, at least with this site, which is a dilapidated site, we received specific comment from the 2 tenants on the site. They've had multiple break-in attempts from homeless individuals. Once there was an encampment on the, I don't know, cardinal directions here, but on the side up Newport Boulevard away from where we are right now, there was a break-in on the side. The project does propose some wrought iron fencing that would close that in permanently and prevent homelessness, prevent this from being attractive to homelessness. I think in general, when you've got an unused site and a site that doesn't have occupancies, that you start to see an increase in unhoused individuals congregating towards there, whether it be during the day, at night, and things of that nature, just because of the lack of general traffic. So it would be our intention that with not only the increased security measures there, but also kind of ongoing traffic of customers, that would help allay any of the current nuisances that are being seen by at least the current residents. I can't speak for the neighbors, other than the few that showed up to the meeting.
All right, thank you, Mr. Maddox. And I'll go ahead and move along. Piggybacking on what Commissioner Vivar was saying earlier, it's to my understanding that you held a community workshop for folks who had been noticed within the catchment area of the mailers in early January. And I was curious to know what the logic was on if it was in fact held in early January, what was the logic in holding it then, seeing as how it's right on the heels of the New Year's and people being out of town? Or was there any discussion about picking a day that would have fostered more community involvement within the local area?
Well, we were uncertain as to when the item was going to come in front of the commission, so we did want to make sure that we had outreach early enough to have constructive conversation with the surrounding neighbors. We didn't necessarily consult the timing around the new year, but we expected it was during a work week. It wasn't during a holiday. And as mentioned earlier, provided contact information for any communication from individuals who weren't able to make it to that meeting.
Okay. And in a similar vein, have you received any response from the residents living on site on this property? And the reason why I'm asking is because out of all the letters of support or opposition, I didn't really see them in here, and also I didn't see that the applicant team had provided any that they may have, carried along the way.
Yeah, so we didn't ask them for a letter of support. They were one of the first ones on site when we were there for the event. They stayed for the duration of it. We thoroughly went through the proposed plans, talked ad nauseum about the proposed project. They were overwhelmingly supportive of it. We could get those letters of support if that were an item of consideration of staff or kind of a determining point on their decision. We just didn't want to harass them further during the process. Part of their support was, in general, as mentioned earlier, the site's been kind of disrepaired for multiple years now. These are, I think, 10 and 20-year tenants who are very happy with where they're located. They're happy that there's no intention to remove them. They're happy with increased security presence as well as a general increase in their living standard based off of the site improvements. So we don't have specific letters, but we could procure those if that were a matter of importance to staff.
I think at the moment, it doesn't really concern me, Mr. Maddox. I think it's a matter of, do the current residents on site understand that there's a proposed intensification of use to that site such that the hours of operation are going to be both earlier and later than what they've experienced as long-term tenants, and have they considered those impacts?
I would say based off of our conversations that they have. We discussed the hours of operation, what it would be like in terms of incoming, outgoing traffic, and all of those things, and they seem to be very understanding of that and in support still.
All right, thank you, Mr. Maddox. I'll move on to the second to last paragraph in the applicant letter, last sentence. It says, furthermore, we are encouraged by the support offered by our neighbors with respect to the proposed site improvements, and we are excited to revitalize the site and improve the overall neighborhood aesthetic. And I guess it's pointed more at, well, who exactly are these neighbors that are excited? And conversely, have you experienced any dissent for your project that you've tried to kind of take into consideration before you came to us today for your CUP hearing?
The only dissent we have seen were in the public comment letters. As mentioned, we reached out to neighbors. We haven't heard anything negative in the 2.5 months since those letters were sent out. The positive support were based off of somewhere between 6 and 10 members of the public that came out to the event that was hosted, which included not only the on-site neighbors, but as well as a family up the street who came in support of it. So a lot of them, voiced general support of just, this is a dilapidated site. So I think it's an overall improvement to the area that was supported, as well as kind of the increased security measures that we heard in those conversations.
All right, thank you, sir. I think I'm done for the moment. I may have some later on, but colleagues, do you have any further questions of the applicant? All right, thank you, both of you, for your time. You're welcome to sit down, and we'll call you back up later. I will now open up for public comments. So if anyone here in chambers wishes to speak to this item, you're welcome to come to either podium. You'll have 3 minutes to speak, and at the 1 minute mark, you'll hear the chime, and then 3 minutes, it ends. And it's not me, I promise.
Thank you. I apologize, that January 3rd meeting was not available during such a busy Christmas, New Year holiday. That was, I am with Laurel Point Townhomes. I have worked on the board for 3 times during my 43 years of owning a home there. I purchased the first and third home at that property 43 years ago. We have done improvement by putting block walls up. We have done things to make our home secure. 43 homes are in that, and it's across the street from this proposed wellness center. I find it hard to believe. During the fair time, we are inundated by walking people that are constantly in that area. We cannot find street parking for our own people that do not have space enough for their cars in our complex. We cannot see where this will work. They are directly across the street from us. Our houses face them. The lighting will be a nightmare, the traffic of in and out. And I didn't catch how many exact proposed parking spaces they're going to have on this renewed site. And it will come as a surprise to the Mesa Performance gentleman who's been there for over 50 years, that I went into his business today, and he is still buried in his business there. And I'm just like so surprised that, boy, you're talking about him being moved. I know that you're giving considerations to the 2 people that are living on that property, but I want you to consider the 63 homes that are directly across the street from this wellness center. I mean, I grew up in the 60s and 70s. I mean, come on, we all did. But you're asking foot traffic? We already have problems with vagrants that will sleep in our bushes. And we have parking patrol that comes throughout there. I don't see where they're going to be watching these things, but I do worry about what you're allowing. You have a cannabis shop that's 1.1 miles away, good, nice guys, cannabis, and then you have one that's less than 1/2 mile from us. So you're putting all of them on Newport Boulevard. And our homes are just being surrounded by these. And with fair traffic, I know the fair people go, wow, there's a cannabis store, let's go. But we are inundated in Costa Mesa with sober living homes and now cannabis stores. And I hope you will consider the 63 homes and all the other surrounding homes where people purchase homes where we can live in the community without this particular business. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much for your time, ma'am. Anyone else in chambers? Yes, sir. Welcome.
My name is Robert White, and I'm a resident of Laurel Point, which is right across the street from the proposed development. And I second the emotion, the emotion and the motion. I think that we need fewer cannabis facilities and more housing. There are already 2, I think I understood that there are 2 units on this property that are housing. I would like to see the rest of that property developed in some fashion as simply housing. We have a housing crisis in California, so more housing. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir. Anyone else in chambers? Yes, ma'am. Welcome.
Hi. My name is Melody, and I'm also with Laurel Point Townhomes. To the point that there was a mailer sent out. This is for a new proposed cannabis business. We received it, between Christmas to New Year's. This is the holidays. If they're trying to create this business, they should be reaching out more to the neighbors around this area. In addition to, we have families with children in our community, in the surrounding houses. So I'm just kind of curious because I've heard there's new ordinance or proposal for restrictions being like 250 feet of residential homes. So I'm just wondering what the process is on that. as well as, sorry, I was just putting notes together. It was also mentioned that studies have been done in the past where it would be quote unquote beneficial for that area. In my experience, just what I've seen with cannabis storefronts, it's usually in an industrial area, which is great. This is literally right next door. You walk across the street, you hit our gates. You walk outside, 10 feet away is a home, like the neighbors across. So I'm just kind of curious what studies have been done where it's beneficial and residential property values have increased. If they could provide other store locations that we can look around or visit, just to kind of see proof that, yes, this would benefit the whole area. And again, we as a townhome association did reach out to the planning committee to let them know. We put together a letter. So again, we may have missed the meeting in January, but that's not to say like, you know, it does take time for 63 units to talk about it, to come to an idea of what's going on. And for the majority, we are against opening up this cannabis store right next to our right next to our community. Thank you.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Welcome.
Hi, my name's Amy. I also live in the Laurel Point Community Townhomes, and I was unaware of the January open house. And I'm against this application. I'd like to ask for you to not approve it. I have a number of concerns in relation to it. First and foremost, the increased traffic flow, whether on foot or vehicle, and the number of people, the type of, and the variety of people that would be coming so close to our neighborhood, where, yes, it's gated, but people can walk in and out very easily as a car enters or exits. So we have had some issues with homeless, the unhoused people, community camping on our lawns, and that could also potentially happen. It hasn't happened in a while, and we're concerned about that potentially happening again. The increased traffic, the noise of that traffic, we can hear things very easily where we're at from Newport Boulevard and the 55, and so just having that increased traffic flow in that one corner would be add more noise to that situation. And the Mesa Performance and Tint Connection they've been a very quiet businesses there with very, not a lot of traffic going in and out. So it's been a quiet establishment with no complaints from them at all. And also, I'm just concerned about home values. We have 63 townhomes, and then there's nice homes right down the street, just down the block from this facility as well. And just what will happen to the home values in this area because of adding this establishment when there are so many abundance going already down Newport Boulevard. There are within less than a mile. So is there really a need for another one this close? I don't think so.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Does anyone else in chambers wish to speak to this item? All right, seeing none. Anna, if we go on to Zoom, I'll just mention off the bat, if you're on Zoom and you'd like to speak, use the raised hand option.
Alexander Haberbush, you may provide your public comment.
Mr. Haberbush, welcome. Mr. Haberbush, if you can unmute yourself.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Okay, perfect. Good evening, honorable members of the Costa Mesa Planning Commission. First, allow me to express my sincere gratitude for your unwavering commitment and diligent efforts in navigating the growth and development within our city. Your endeavors in implementing new ordinances and refining planning processes are commendable. Representing homeowners and business owners in Eastside Costa Mesa, I, along with my clients, deeply appreciate this commission and the council's dedication to preserving the integrity and character of our community. I stand before you today to discuss Planning Application 2208 for Newport Wellness, a proposed retail cannabis storefront with delivery services located at 2490 Newport Boulevard. While the introduction of regulated cannabis businesses can offer economic benefits and ensure legal compliance, there are significant concerns regarding their placement and density, especially in proximity to residential zones. One of my clients, Mr. John Upton, a longtime homeowner in Eastside Costa Mesa, embodies the community spirit, which is supportive of the city's forward momentum in managing cannabis operations. Yet, Mr. Upton, alongside numerous neighbors, is increasingly troubled by the prospect of yet another cannabis retailer on Newport Boulevard. At this point, I believe it'll be 6 on this side of the road within a span of about 2 miles. This proposed establishment, which would mark, again, as I said, the 6th of its kind in a remarkably condensed area, directly impacts their daily lives and the community's essence. The presence of 2 apartment buildings on the same lot of the proposed Newport Wellness storefront further accentuates our apprehension. This situation raises pressing questions about the compatibility of high-density cannabis retail within residential vicinities and its implications for traffic, public safety, and the overall quality of life. Therefore, we urge this Planning Commission to exercise heightened scrutiny in evaluating this and similar applications. It's crucial to consider not only the immediate economic impacts, but also the long-term effects on our community and its welfare and cohesion. In conclusion, while we recognize the potential benefits of regulated cannabis businesses, we emphasize the need for judicious evaluation of their proliferation and placement. Our community's future and vibrancy depends on decisions made today, and we trust the Planning Commission will consider the long-term impacts of such establishments. Please consider rejecting this conditional use permit application, as cannabis retailers are already far too over-concentrated in this vicinity. Thank you very much for your attention to these matters and for your continued service to our community.
Thank you, Mr. Haberbush. Anna, anyone else on Zoom?
No, there's not, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, anyone on telephone? And for those who may be on telephone, you're welcome to push *9 to put yourself in the queue and mute yourself.
No, there is not, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. I'll go ahead and close the public comment portion of the public hearing and ask my colleagues if you have any further questions for the applicant. All right, seeing none. Mr. Maddox, Mr. Scott, if you have any closing comments you'd like to make, you're welcome to come up and make those.
I'd like to thank you guys all for having us here again tonight. I'd like to start off by apologizing for the timing of our outreach to everybody. I guess we didn't think about it diligently enough. We still open any type of conversation and collaboration and would have diligently looked forward to any communication from you in the past 2 months. It is not our intent to be a burden on any neighbors. In fact, we have a good neighbor policy in order to do the best that we can to anybody and everybody within the vicinity of our operations. We did hear complaints tonight about people walking within the vicinity, people going to the fair, general traffic constraints and issues of that nature. We hear those. We've been working on a traffic plan. We do have a traffic plan. We are willing to consider off-site parking for staff. And in addition to that, we will have security guards monitoring the parking conditions, as well as an employee who's obligated per conditions of approval to do so. I'm not sure that that in and of itself is going to allay the concerns of our neighbors, but I do think that long conversation about the proposed project and discussions as opposed to lobbying across a public meeting would go a long way, and we'd be open for that discussion if our neighbors would be. You know, it is our intention that with the improvements that we would actually be increasing property values of the overall neighborhood. We understand that I mean, I don't know if the commissioners have driven the site or seen it. I know that there were some pictures that were shown, and we've got dilapidated, non-conforming, you know, probably hazardous buildings on this site that have been a part of this neighborhood for years. You know, and I do view this project as an opportunity to come in and revitalize that corner and provide at least an increased overall aesthetic and increased security to the neighborhood. So we'd look forward to that opportunity. We'd look forward to increased communication and dialogue with our neighbors. our information is available per those mailers. I'm happy to make myself available after tonight, pending the outcome either way, to discuss and work with you guys about the potential. We understand public's concerns, but it's also our intention to be as good of operator as possible and to operate compliantly, not only with state and local regulations, but with all of the conditions of approval, which essentially mandate that we're good operators within the community.
And to reiterate what Sean said, we apologize for the timing of the outreach. And if the CUP is approved, as a community liaison, I'll be available 24/7 for any concerns. And, you know, as Sean said, we just want to be good neighbors and work in compliance. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. If you can stay here for just one sec. Colleagues, do you have any further questions of the applicant before we go on to questions of staff? I do have one, if I could revisit this, Mr. Maddox, Mr. Scott. With a property like this, and I have been to this property and I've seen it for years. I grew up here in Costa Mesa. Can you determine as to why the property owner would want to go into the cannabis business or lease out the site, or if there was any intention to sell the property to the team? Why is it now cannabis and not some other use beforehand?
I can't speak to that specifically. I know that there is no agreement for the purchase of the property.
Okay.
You know, in speaking with the tenants that currently occupy the residential units, you know, they say that the landlord essentially inherited the property and has been somewhat removed from the process in general, so that might speak to it. You know, that might just be opportunism of the cannabis industry that found itself on the landlord's door. But regardless, you know, I think this presents itself as an opportunity to bring in new commerce and economic activity to a long overseen or forgotten site.
Okay. And another question for those members of the surrounding community to the project site. I believe it's Keith. Are you the 24/7 contact? If anyone in the community has a question or a concern, they call you.
Yes, I'm the community liaison.
Okay. All right. And in that letter that went out to the surrounding community, was your number included so that folks could call you and ask questions?
Correct. My number and email address.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Commissioners, any further questions of the applicant?
I do have one question. sir.
Yes, Commissioner Navarre.
So, as it appears that the automotive type businesses that were there or are there from, now I'm a bit confused about whether or not they're operating, because I think somebody from the public comment seemed to suggest that the one of the places is still open, but nonetheless, is there a particular reason why you didn't consider the hours of operation of the current businesses that were there, which I think are something along the lines of 9 a.m. to 5 p.m.?
Probably just a general competitive market constraint. We are coming into a community where at this point 22 different operators have been approved per the city's ordinances. You know, there's been somewhat of a open market stance by at least the city council to this. And so overtly constraining our hours of operation, I think, would pose a competitive disadvantage to all the other retailers. I do think that there'd be a willingness, and you know, the 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. is pretty broad. I don't think that we'll be open at 7 a.m. It's more likely going to be 8 or 9 a.m. and we'd be willing to, you know, accept a provisional condition as to that. That could maybe be later revisited upon 6 months of operations with no negative incidents. You know, and I think similarly with the evening, you know, during the weekends, that probably serves as a competitive disadvantage, but maybe during weekdays, we could be open to slightly earlier closing hours. But to answer your question directly, it's mostly just market competition and the fact that there's multiple other operators. And at the end of the day, we do need to operate a successful business in order to not go out of business.
And regarding competitiveness and market advantages or disadvantages, You've mentioned the number of applications that are open. So what would in your mind would make your business profitable and being able to compete with 22 other businesses that are going to be operating, at some point, probably before you open, and that will have, pretty similar services and products to what you're operating and offering in terms of the product?
Somewhat of a roulette wheel there, but the hope is essentially the vertical integration of the owners would give them somewhat of a competitive advantage. They are Orange County based. Their manufacturing and distributions in Santa Ana. They've got a following not only through that, but through their other businesses. So they'd be able to drive some local traffic just through general community. This is also aimed to be more of a premium cannabis purveyor. So at the end of the day, most operators can't get away from carrying people like Steezy, where just on every shelf, but I do think that the selection of what's going to be offered here is going to be more to the high end. So you're looking at better margins. That's going to rely on more word of mouth, quality product offerings, and things of that nature.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Maddox.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner. Anyone else? All right. I think that's it from us. Appreciate it, Mr. Maddox, Mr. Scott. Thank you. Questions for staff, if anyone has them. Commissioner Rojas.
Yes, I do. I just wanted to, something's been sitting in, spinning in my mind right now. And I wanted to ask Ms. Halligan if you could elaborate a little bit more on the question that Commissioner Toller was asking for public record, because I understand there's a little bit of confusion on there, and I wanted to make sure we clarify for it regarding the ordinances. I can see some of the letters that we received. The impression is that the City Council has already changed the ordinance, but this is not necessarily being affected by that decision. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that response for public record?
Sure, Commissioner Rojas. The City Council has directed staff to draft amendments to the city's cannabis ordinances, and will be returning in April with those drafts. And then the City Council can choose to give first reading, and then we'll come back for a second reading. But so far, the recommendations that they've made would not affect the current applications. So for example, if there is a cap or if there is a setback from residential zones, that would not apply to our applications that are in our CUP or CBP phase.
So to beat a dead horse, essentially, we're not going to grandfather these things into the current ones. That would apply to future applications and not this one at this time.
So correct, the changes that the City Council is considering would affect future applications other than a cap.
Perfect, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that was very clear.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Rojas. Commissioner Andrade?
One of the public comments noted a couple of daycares or preschools. Apparently Vanguard has a youth center class, and then there's mothers of preschoolers. I don't know if those are within the scope and within the definition of that we're currently sitting with and within the 1,000 distance.
Commissioner Andrade, staff researched those comments, and what we found is that in 2016, Mothers of Preschoolers, which is a nonprofit, held meetings at a church on Vanguard's property, but it's not a daycare. So even if you have volunteers that are providing daycare services while you attend a service or a meeting, that does not meet our definition. It's not a state licensed daycare facility. And I've also not found any evidence of that operation continuing, but whether or not it's MOPS or a different group that's had meetings with free childcare, that's not one of our licensed daycares that's subject to that separation requirement. We've also been unable to find any daycare center at Vanguard University as well.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Right. Thank you, Commissioner. Anyone else? Commissioner Rivera? No? Okay. All right. We'll now close the public hearing and say thank you, Ms. Halligan, for the responses, and to all of our staff. You guys do a top-notch job. Before we send this to a motion, I'm happy to discuss this amongst ourselves if there's anything that's noodling around. So just go ahead and turn your mic on if you'd like to jump in. Pre-motion.
I'll take a stab at this one myself. Rarely, you know me, I'm usually pretty quiet and reserved on these things, but I'm mulling a couple of things around here. And the ones that are jumping out at me are land use 1 and land use 3. You know, development of mix and balance of housing opportunities, commercial goods, services, and employment opportunities, and considerations of the need of business and residential segments of the community. And I understand that current legislation causes or tells us that if you look up and down Newport Boulevard, there's already a significant amount of cannabis businesses on there. This takes me back to months ago when I said I wish, and I'm still back in there. I'm still wishing that that wasn't the case, that we were able to be a little bit more stringent on it. But the way that the rules are written right now, this is more than 1,000 feet away. It's a 0.4 miles away. I checked it on my phone before we started. This 0.4 miles away from another cannabis business, even the ones that are not opened yet, the ones that you guys, the public, didn't see, but that were brought up by our fellow commissioners here, the purple ones, even that is 0.4 miles away. So I get it in terms of, you know, a lot of concerns that I personally, this is why I'm talking out loud. I hear the community's request. I am a member of the community. But according to the letter of the law, it's not a direct violation of it. Is it a concentration and saturation? Depends on your perspective. That's number one. And then number 3 is protect existing stabilized residential neighborhoods, including mobile home parks, manufactured housing parks from encroachment of incompatible or potentially disruptive land uses and or activities. And based upon the amount of comments we've heard from residents in the area, one could argue that that is not being supported here. That is against land use policy 3. But at the same time, we're not there yet. It has been ruled on, but it's not that rule does not apply to this situation. So I am a little conflicted on that one, and for those reasons. But I wanted to make sure that that goes out on public because, again, according to the letter of the law as it currently stands, I don't know that one can argue that this is in violation of that. So perhaps in the future, it probably would be, but at this current moment in time, I don't know that it is. And that's just my comment and inner thoughts I wanted to share.
All right. Thank you very much, Commissioner Rojas. Wise words. Commissioner Vivar.
Yeah, kind of, sort of, I guess this is directed at Commissioner Rojas and just in general to colleagues and anyone listening. Something that stuck out to me in staff's kind of presentation, well, when I was talking to Ms. Halligan earlier and asking questions, and based on what I'd read when I read in the staff report, the fact that the residential units on site are 10 feet away from the proposed retail cannabis establishment. I mean, 10 feet is, gosh, probably less than here to, you know, the first row of seats there or second row of seats. It's really not that far away. And when I asked her about the security lighting and, you know, whether essentially we'd be able to simultaneously have adequate security lighting and or at least what was proposed, and you know, not being able to and not impacting residential units, because we all know that security lighting is meant to be bright and provide adequate lighting at night of areas so that they're not dark and you know, or don't provide places where people can hide away from being seen. And the fact that she said that there had to be kind of a bit more working on that in terms of the shielding the light and possibly providing other types of light fixtures. That definitely stuck out to me, and kind of me wondering, well, even if we move the security lighting, you know, wouldn't that still possibly affect the 2 units that are on the site, as well as those across the street possibly? And if those are moved, then would we not possibly create maybe a dark area or darker area closer to those two units. So that's definitely that's something stuck out to me and that I'm continuing to mull over.
Is it all, Commissioner?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Andrade.
Yeah, similarly, I'm recalling back some of the information that we were presented in the past about our cannabis consultant, I believe it's HCL. I'm trying to recall exactly the formula. I think it was when in regards to land use 6B, which is city revenue, and then also 6.15, uniqueness and commercial growing new business. I believe the recommendation was 10 storefronts for every, I want to say 100,000 folks, residents. And considering the current Costa Mesa population, we've already surpassed that with 22 stores approved, another 10 stores to come online. So I think that's the challenge for me here is we're already at the recommendation of the consultants over what the city will benefit in revenue. And then also in order for it to continue to be a new and growing business when we're already at 22. So almost double the population that we actually have. So that's something to consider.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Andrade. Appreciate your thoughts. Vice Chair.
Sure. I'll show my cards. I'm leaning towards approving this, and I am always torn between trying to convince my colleagues up here to do what I think is the proper thing and vote for approval, because I do agree with a lot of the commenters that I don't like the product. I don't like the fact that it's all over our city. I don't like driving around and seeing these everywhere. And I would like to see something else cooler there. Sometimes I do have that internal conflict. Man, we're approving this when we could have something, it's a prime site for something else. But I think there's a big disconnect between, from the public's perspective, what people think our role up here is and what it actually is. So I think it's helpful to remember we don't create policy, we don't direct staff, we just implement the existing ordinance. And so we have real specific findings, and we got to review this application that's before us and the evidence that's before us in terms of its consistency with those findings. And I read through those. Is this incompatible with development in the same general area? It's not new construction. It's a dilapidated, rundown place that people are breaking into, and it's going to get a major facelift. It's going to look nice. Fun fact, I've mentioned this before, smoke shops, which what a lot of people conflate these with. These are kind of like more like Louis Vuittons than smoke shops. But smoke shops are permitted by right. A smoke shop could just move in there tomorrow. And those are what a lot of people imagine these to be. Materially detrimental to the health, safety, and welfare of the public. No, I don't see, I can't, I'm trying. I'm going through these arguments in my head, injurious to property or improvement within the immediate neighborhood. Like I said, this is a new tenant that's going to take much better care of this site than the previous tenants. And we've done dozens of these, and every time we get the same handful of reactions. And I promise you that I'm taking them seriously. I think through them. There's the thought that there's going to be vagrants and loitering and using nearby. But read the conditions of approval. Go visit the other ones in sight. This isn't what a lot of people are expecting. Traffic and parking. That's a bigger issue. We hear that no matter what is happening. If it's new construction, it's a new tenant. We can't allow somebody to invest in our city, a new business to open up because of traffic and parking. That happens almost every meeting. Too many shops, well, that's the market. I agree. Maybe there's too many shops, but just swap out the product with any other product, and you kind of see how silly that is. If there were too many hot dog shops, would this chambers be full of people complaining about that? Crime, as far as I understand our PD disagrees with that. That's a fair enough reaction, but it's unfounded. So anyway, I urge my colleagues to approve this.
All right, thank you, Vice Chair Toller. As the Mayor Pro Tem of City Council is the wise one with them, you're our wise one here, bringing us back. So thank you. As with just about anything else that we discuss up here, I can understand where everyone's coming from, be it from the head, be it from the heart, be it from a feeling, and especially the findings. I think that the vice chair makes a really good point, particularly early on in his observation about what exactly we are tasked to do up here. I think some people believe that we're kingmakers, or that we somehow get to just wave a wand and say, you know, you're approved and you get an approval. It's not really like that. Really, everything that we weigh up here has to be material. It has to be fact. Whether we like it or not, it's a burden of proof that somehow comports with our general plan and the land use policies that guide our community, as a constitution would for our country. Whether we agree with it or not, we're here to make sure that it adheres to that. Now, for those of you who have the staff agenda in front of you, you're welcome to turn over to page, let's say 14 and 15. And you'll see the land use policies and objectives, and particularly the three major findings that we need to make in order to approve, augment, or deny certain projects. And we can go through those together if you'd like. Land use policy 1.1, to provide for the development of a mix and balance of housing opportunities, commercial goods and services, and employment opportunities in the consideration and the needs of the businesses and residential segments of the community. And I think if you read that carefully, you can see that some of the language in these land use policies is somewhat nebulous. It's open to interpretation, such as, what exactly do you consider to be a balance? What exactly do you consider to be a mix of goods and services? Do you put that in relationship to all the other similar retail uses around the community, or compartmentalize it as a standalone item in and of itself? So it is somewhat open to interpretation in that sense, and one of the reasons why I think people find a wide swath of interpretation to these things. Objective Land Use Policy 6B, encourage and facilitate activities that expand the city's revenue base. For anyone that has been following Measure Q and what retail cannabis brings to this community, in general, it's a fairly substantive infusion of cash into the city's coffers, and not only into our general fund, but into specific pools like first-time home buyers and parks and so forth. These are the money that we get, 7% retail tax that we get, is an infusion for programs that we have within the city that benefit all. But if we read it again, encourage and facilitate activities that expand the city's revenue base, and you ask yourself the question, at what point does an approval just mean another approval? Does it really mean that you're expanding the tax base, or are you just spreading that tax base out around more people that are competing for that same small piece of pie? So that's one of the ideas that comes to mind there. If you move on to land use policy 6.15, promote unique and specialized commercial and industrial districts within the city, which allow for incubation of new or growing businesses and industries. I think one can argue that it is relatively new as compared to other forms of businesses around this community, but at what point are you incubating it, and at what point are you generally just promoting it? That in and of itself is an outstanding question too. At what point is it not new anymore? At what point are you incubating, and then at what point has it hatched, so to speak? Okay. If you look at land use policy 3.1, protect existing stabilized residential neighborhoods, including mobile home parks and manufactured housing parks, from the encroachment of incompatible or potentially disruptive land uses and or activities. You can see where that opens up a series of questions as well. Potential. Well, what is potentially disruptive? And what exactly is considered an encroachment? Is it an encroachment to, and I throw this out to the public philosophically in a sense. When you have an existing business like the one that's located there, I was there today. And what I saw on site was an old BMW with flat tires, a cracked sidewalk, a lack of accessibility. I saw wood siding kicked in from the outside as if someone were trying to enter the building from the outside. I saw missing lettering in the marquee. I saw a lot of things that were, to be quite frank, it was a bit cringy. And then when you look at a site plan, like the one here, and you see, I think most people would agree that these are pretty decent designs. And especially when you take into consideration that you cannot see inside from the outside, that the current ordinance does not allow for a retail cannabis operation to say, this is weed, this is cannabis, come get high here. It's very controlled. And as a matter of fact, if you drive around the city, one could argue that you wouldn't even know what a lot of these places are because it's so obfuscated. As a matter of fact, we have some people going into some of these retail cannabis establishments thinking that it's something else, like a burger joint or a juice bar. And there's proof of that. I think on the topic, and this isn't in the staff agenda per se, but on the topic of does this really lower property values, I can tell you that I pretty much lived and breathed this as far as a city decision maker, having followed this from the beginning in 2020, that I've seen no evidence that these places actually lower property values. And I can't say that I've actually seen anything that says it raises property values either. What I do believe is that when you are guaranteed 24-hour on-site security with a slew of cameras that are not only on the interior of the building, but on the outside as well, and that the operators are actively willing to hand over any information to PD should there be a crime, that's actually a positive thing for our community. More eyes on a boulevard that has traditionally been very problematic for us, be it vagrants, be it crime, be it, call it homelessness, if you will, or the unhoused. I will say too that from what the applicant was saying earlier about getting support from the local community, it may have been contingent on the assumption that 24-hour on-site security, as in someone was going to be on site after operating hours, was what was going to be on the books. And I'll say that currently, City Council has been considering augmenting that so that 24-hour on-site security may not be present, but only present during operating hours, at which point you're left with cameras on site and a direct line to PD should anything happen. Now, I could go on and on, because I talk about this all the time anyways. But what I will say is, like some of my colleagues, I see the benefit to the community, particularly that strip of Monte Vista and Newport Boulevard and what I know to be happening on that frontage road. I think that this would be a benefit security-wise. And at the same time, I can see why our neighbors would not like this use either, especially if you're thinking it's just going to be a a smoking cafe where people are just going to go there and get high, which they don't. They get their product and they leave. So, like anything else, I continue to evolve my thinking. I try to take in what the community tells us and to make interpretations that I do genuinely believe to be of the best interest of this community. Because I love this community, as does everyone up here. We all live here. So with that, I'll go ahead and stop my ramble.
Yeah, would love to just jump in there really quick. I also want to just make a quick point for our community, anyone that's listening, just in general, and just like, especially like reading through some of the public comments that we received today. Bringing in any business, this business or any other in this dilapidated building, which I understand has some concerns, it's not going to address the problem on homelessness. People are vagrant in our streets because they don't have a stable shelter or a stable roof over their head. These are folks that are living on crisis mode. So if they're acting out of that crisis of not knowing where you're going to lay your head safely, I don't think that that's going to be addressed whether we put a lollipop shop here or a weed shop. So I just want to kind of separate those two comments. People that are houseless are neighbors. So I just want to, again, it's really difficult to hear those kind of comments because any kind of business that goes up there is not going to address the difference that we just don't have enough affordable housing for everyone in our community. That's all.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Andrade. I know housing's near and dear to us, but kind of running in, I wouldn't say parallel, but in tangent to things like this. All right, so I can keep going on and on like I was mentioning, but I'll stop and I'll open it up to my colleagues if you'd like to make a motion. Let's see where it goes. Motion made by Commissioner Vivar. What is your motion, Commissioner?
What's the, it's PA 21 dash?
This is PA 22-08.
08, okay. So I'd like to make the motion to deny planning application PA 22-08 on the grounds that the proposed development is not substantially compatible with nearby development, especially as it relates to the two existing units and to the other large residential developments nearby, and also backing my reasoning on LU Land Use Policy 3.1 about protecting existing residential areas from kind of an intensification of use.
Would that also be as written encroachment of incompatible or potentially disruptive land uses and or activities?
Yes.
Okay, well, just for clarification. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Andrade. Commissioner Vivar, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yeah, I think that we had a great kind of back and forth here with the sort of the pros and cons of this, but more generally a philosophical conversation of, I guess of cannabis establishments in our city and what they do and don't do and what we think they, what we'd like them to do and what they may not do. And I want to say that I really resounded with Commissioner Andrade's comment regarding, whether we put a lollipop shop here or a cannabis dispensary, does that really, change in her mind homelessness? I would extend it further and would say, does putting something else here necessarily mean that the community will improve? Everybody talks about, well, we're going to clean up the sidewalk and build new sidewalk. And hey, I love sidewalk. I'm an active transportation person. I don't drive, so I like to have things like that. Making sure that pedestrian infrastructure is there and usable. But is relying on a particular industry, whether this or any other industry, to basically fix up our city and places in our city where some of the public infrastructure isn't there, or private properties have been kind of left to disrepair. I think that relying on any kind of industry, in my mind, is problematic, because we kind of shift away, I guess you could say, proper city management to the private sector. And I don't mean that it's our job to come in and fix everything up, but we do have codes that say that property should be maintained. For example, the sidewalk should be maintained, et cetera, et cetera. And if we as a city have not been doing a great job of kind of having landlords on the hook for that, then I don't know. I mean, I think that relying on someone to come in and fix up a place is really just a Band-Aid, because really it's not the tenants, as Commissioner Toller mentioned earlier, that kind of have anything to do with the repair or disrepair of a particular place, but really the landowners, the property owners who haven't been investing into our community. And as we heard tonight from one of the residents, landlords who may in some instances kind of be kind of disengaged and maybe don't even live here anymore. And who's to say that we fix up this building and we add in a sidewalk, et cetera, and that this building isn't going to look the exact same way in 20 years when the sidewalk hasn't been maintained and the building hasn't been maintained. This could just be a temporary fix. And if there is no proper maintenance and proper checks that our city codes are being met and sending our code enforcement guys out there, then I'm convinced that this and any other property in the city that is being improved because of kind of cannabis money, you could say, will look the exact same way as it does today. So I don't think that is a long-term fix. And relying our approval of a site based on that logic, I think is very problematic. So that is my long rant for why I am in opposition of this project.
Thank you, Commissioner Vivar. I think the long rant rubbed off. So, Commissioner Andrade, if you'd like to follow up.
Yeah, first off, I do appreciate the opportunity that Newport Wellness is taking out here, Keith and your client, to invest in your local community. That is really exciting. And absolutely, I understand how this could be. It was really hard to lean here because, yes, it would be a huge aesthetic improvement of that area and that building itself. But again, just leaning on what we understand provided by a consultants directly that the city hired, the policies that we currently have, standing on LU 1.1, 6 1.5, and 3.1, I cannot support this moving forward.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Andrade. Other commissioners, Commissioner Rojas, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I do. I'm going to just go ahead and I will not be agreeing with the denial of this application, and I'll tell you why. Because the reality of it is we don't have a lollipop stand applying to occupy this business and bring in business to this area. We have this group here, and I believe that they're doing everything that they can, and in the regulations that have been put out, they're still within accordance of it. They're not in violation of it. It's a legitimate, viable business. It's a legal business. I myself may not like the area and the proximity to residences and this, that, and the other, but that's neither here nor there. It says, Chairman said here, it's not for us to create the policy, it's for us to implement it. We don't get to decide what's going to happen, we only get to decide where it's going to go. And that decision was already made, and it's beyond our control. So we have to stay within the parameters of what we have. Personally, myself, on a personal level, I don't like it, but on a professional level and a responsible level that we have here, we have an obligation stuck between a rock and a hard place. And from what I see, they have met all the requirements, and therefore, I don't know, that's just my decision there.
Vice Chair.
Yeah, I'll just throw in, since we're going around and talking about it. The way I think of it is that this is a business that wants to invest in our community to set up shop, and they're playing by the rules. And the decision I feel tonight is, should we use our governmental power to get in the way? Should the government get in the way of that? I understand you could make a case, and we've kind of, those in favor of denial are making that case, trying to make that case. But I feel like using that same logic, to be consistent, you have to say no to a lot of things. I think this business is not different than a lot of businesses that we allow by right all the time. So I'd like to make a substitute motion, if I may.
Sure. Anna, if we can clear the board for the substitute.
I recommend that the Planning Commission adopt a resolution to find that the project is categorically exempt from the provisions of CEQA per section 15301, and approve Planning Commission 2208 subject to the conditions of approval as contained in the resolution.
Right. Thank you, Vice Chair. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Rojas. Would you like to speak to your motion, Commissioner Toller? Or
No.
Vice Chair Toller? Commissioner Rojas?
No.
Would the maker of the motion and the second be open to any modifications?
Yeah.
Okay. Second? Okay. I would be, in order to support this motion, I know that we're in a bit of a gray area when it comes to 24-hour on-site security. And I think that if there was ever any intention to do with 24-hour on-site security, or to modify what the existing code is for what may or may not be coming down the pipeline, I would insist that that not be a zoning administrator's decision, but that it come back to Planning Commission for that decision. Is that something that you would be willing to add to the condition of approval, that should the applicant seek a waiver for on-site, like 24-hour on-site security, an actual human being, that decision would come back to us to make that determination?
Yeah, that'd be fine with me. And were there going to be any other ones? Because the applicant had mentioned parking monitoring for a few months too.
Yeah, well, first off, is the second willing to?
Absolutely. I think that's fair and for protection of residential areas.
Okay. And thank you, Vice Chair. I think the applicant was throwing it out there as an offering. And I think if that's still true, Mr. Maddox, I think that a 3-month on-site parking attendant sounds reasonable, at which point zoning administrator can make the final decision to either keep it or do away with it. Is that something that the maker and the second would be willing?
Yeah, that sounds right to me.
Agreed.
Okay. I don't think I'm missing anything, but seeing as how we have a couple extra conditions, I'll go ahead and speak to the motion now with those 2 additional things. In saying that I can see where both sides of my colleagues are on this. And I know that I'm the decisive vote on this, and I know that might be a bit of a letdown for some of you who were seeking a particular outcome. What I will say is that I do genuinely believe that when you have more eyes on the street particularly on certain sections and the majority of Newport Boulevard currently, that it has the capacity to lead to better outcomes for the community as a whole, and particularly for East Side. And I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to kind of mandate the on-site 24-hour security, and that if there was any request for modification, given what may or may not change in the future from City Council, that we at least have that on record to make that decision ourselves. Because your safety and your well-being is top priority. And I have to say that I don't think that cannabis shops in and of themselves are some horrific land use. I can tell you that I did vote for Measure K. Did I think that it would transpire the way that it did? No, I didn't. And I think that some of those ideas are now being rectified as we speak. Or I'm sorry. Oh yeah, Measure Q, not K. That's another one. So many measures nowadays. Thanks, Vice Chair. So it's not to shoehorn a use on you or to force a particular use on you that is detrimental to your residences, because I honestly don't see it. And if or when there is an issue, it's my hope that you can reach out to the owner and that you have his cell phone number, and that he will be exceedingly responsive to any of those concerns. And that if you have any concerns beyond that, that you can call our staff and make them aware of what's going on. So I think that between the 24-hour on-site security, some potential impediments for circulation on site via traffic and foot traffic and so forth, my concerns have been ameliorated. And if there's a problem, it's my hope that the community will be vigilant, reach out to us, and let us know about those things, in addition to the applicant, who is, it's really my genuine hope that he and the others will integrate right into the community and be really good neighbors for you. I really do. So since this is the substitute motion, my two other colleagues are welcome to jump in and speak to it if they'd like. Commissioner Vivar?
Yeah. I think that the fact that we're kind of going to, in my opinion, great lengths to make sure that this is compatible with the surrounding area and the security condition, as well as, you know, continuing this emphasis on residential compatibility. I do think that really all of this hinges on hoping for a positive outcome rather than being sure of one. Obviously, no one can say whether something will be a positive outcome or a negative outcome until it's actually up and running. But I still think that we've really, in my mind, failed to meet with the kind of the bar of making sure that the two existing units on the site are not being impacted, because you know, as Chair, you pointed out during the meeting yourself, we do not know if the residents there who seemed agreeable to this proposed project, in fact, understood whether or not this was going to be of a 7 to 10 type of business rather than what they were used to. And I don't know that they've stopped to consider things like potential light pollution and sort of impact as well with traffic and noise from just a more intense use than they would have been living next to. So I won't be supporting the motion because I think that those underlying concerns are just haven't really been properly met, and I think are kind of being brushed under the rug in my opinion. So thank you.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts, Commissioner Vivar. Commissioner Andrade?
Yeah, I had a clarifying question. Maybe this is for staff. So as hard as it is to look in the future, whether city council is going to make further amendments to the recommendations for the changes in the ordinance. Because one of the recommendations was to create a buffer within residential. So what would happen for, should this business moves forward, opens up, and then we create that, the policy gets updated with having that residential buffer? Like, how would we go about handling that situation?
So Commissioner Andrade, the City Council's motion was specific that that buffer would not apply to the current applications. And so this site wouldn't be subject to it. It would be considered legal nonconforming with a new standard, but it would not affect its ability to operate.
So City Council already has forecasted to include distance between residential. So that's, I think, something to consider. And another, and going off on the another great development of mix and balance of what our city should have, right? The same body is also looking at the affordable housing ordinance as well. And very limited opportunities on where we can continue to develop, which is right along the commercial corridor. So, again, just thinking ahead on the greater picture of what our city can have is, again, one of the reasons why I cannot support this motions in support of the policies that we currently have standing. So that's all.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Andrade. Unless anyone else wants to have a second bite, call the question. All right, Anna, if we could call the question, please.
That motion carries 3-2 with Commissioner Vivar and Commissioner Andrade voting no.
All right. Thank you, Anna. That decision is final unless appealed to the City Council within 7 days. Good luck. All right. After a long first item, let's go ahead and take a 10 to 15 minute break, and we'll see you back here around 8:20. All right, welcome back to the Planning Commission meeting of March 25th, 2024. I call the meeting back into order. And I see that we have no old business, but there is one new business item tonight. And Anna, if you'd please read the title of new business item number 1.
New business item number 1, Fairview Developmental Center project update. Please know we have received public comments on this item that have been provided to the commission and made a part of the record. This is
Okay, so no ex parte on this one. All right, thank you very much. Now turn it over to Ms. Nathavagdongse. If you'd like to take it over, please.
Thank you, Chair Earth. My name is Paivon Nantavongdwansi, Principal Planner for the Economic and Development Services Department. This agenda item will provide the Planning Commission an overview and update of the Fairview Developmental Center project. I'm here with the city's consultant team, PlaceWorks, Ms. Karen Goley, Principal in Charge, and Ms. Suzanne Schwabs, Project Manager. I'm also here with Cecilia Gallardo Daly, our Assistant City Manager. We kicked off the project last fall and spent several of the past month collecting data and engaging in the community. The intent of today's presentation is to provide the Commission a project overview, background on its history, housing goals, a summary of community outreach and key development consideration, and the next steps. We are also here to answer any questions you may have concerning the project. With that, I'll pass on the presentation to Suzanne.
Thank you, Paivon. Chair Arith, Vice Chair Toller, and the rest of the commission, thank you for having us this evening. We're excited to be here and share an update about this exciting project for the city with all of you. As Paivon mentioned, we're here tonight. We're with the consulting firm Placeworks. We also have a host of sub-consultants on our team who are technical experts. They're helping to advise and also have been participating in many of our community workshops to date. And I just wanted to also make you aware of them. That's Gensler, Fair and Peers, Fusco, Developers Research, and eCorp. They are not here with us this evening, but you may hear from them in the future. So we're here today to provide an overview, and it's really an opportunity for us to have a discussion with you on the Fairview Developmental Center specific plan project. We're going to be giving you a status of the FDC site and an overview of the agreements with the state. We're going to talk a little bit about the city's housing goal, the specific plan process and timeline. The workshops I was just starting to mention to you, we'll talk a bit about this evening as well. We have some market study findings and economic overview to share, as well as some future developer considerations. And of course, we'll have plenty of time at the end for any questions or discussion and receiving input from all of you. So let me start first with the project details and a little bit of an overview of the existing conditions. Perhaps you've had the opportunity to be over near the site recently, but just to orient you, access is taken to the Fairview Developmental Center site off of Harbor Boulevard and Fair Drive. And we're nestled within the Costa Mesa Golf Course near the country club as well. The Harbor Village Apartments are just to the north of the site, and Joanne Street is just to the south, as you see there. Again, we'll talk in more detail about a lot of these things, but the Emergency Operations Center, you also see an arrow pointing to, is a state-planned project in the southwest corner there as well. So the project itself that we're describing to you and that Placeworks that we're working on is a specific plan document and an environmental impact report. So it's a city-led effort. The agreement that I mentioned between the city and the state identified the city as the lead in preparing this future use plan, land use plan, and land use regulations for the property. The state, though, is expected to, well, the state will select the master developer. And that master developer is the entity responsible for implementing the plan. The state is a partner in this project. They have funded the project through a grant, and they also have some long-term planned uses for the site, that Emergency Operations Center that I mentioned earlier, and additional housing, which we will get into in further slides here. As you can see also on the screen, we've kicked off the project last fall, and we have been moving relatively quickly, having held 3 workshops already to date. I'm going to take a step back for just a moment, though, and talk to you a little bit about the history of the property before we dive into some of those other planned uses. So it is a state-owned site. You may also remember that the state also owned the golf course, which is now a city-owned property. The site itself opened in 1959. Over the years, it's been home to thousands of residents. Developmentally disabled people have been cared for there throughout their lifetime, and they've been able to care for people at a range of ages from newborn all the way through 70 years and older. As the care model changed, the facility and many of the similar facilities throughout the state closed, or are now, this one in particular is what is called a warm shutdown, meaning that the facility is maintained. They have a license for temporary emergent cases to be housed until a permanent home for care can be found. So if you go on the site, you might notice that there is some activity there, but there are no active residents. Moving forward then, a little bit more detail on these actions by the city and the state. In your staff report, I think you received a high-level timeline going back to maybe even as early as, I think, 2012, when the state made some changes regarding the care for the developmentally disabled. But here I'll start you with 2015. There's several Senate bills that really lay the groundwork for the future uses that we would be planning for here. And you'll note that several of them involve housing. So this first one here is 20 acres of the site for the developmentally disabled. That project is often referred to as Shannon's Mountain. We talked a little bit about the steps the state took through their closure plan and the status of the site today. Most recently then, there was another Senate bill approved for an additional housing need you'll see there in 2023. That's up to 3 complex needs homes. And then the state also approved and certified their Emergency Operations Center. That all happened last fall, just as we were kicking off this project. As we move forward here, you'll see into 2024, we're going to continue our work, and I'll talk about those details in a moment, but the state is also expected to initiate their selection of that future developer. So you may recall, just not too long ago, working on the city's housing element, the site itself was identified in Program 3B as a priority use for housing. And so at the time, the city worked through, I think, a couple iterations of what that capacity could be for the site. And ultimately, it was identified for 2,300 units. Those were broken down into very low, low, moderate, and above moderate categories with targets for each of them. Overall, with a goal of 40% being available to low and very low income people. I also want to note here that we're talking a lot about housing. We have state bills for it. We have a priority for it in the housing element, but that doesn't preclude other uses from being on site. We've heard already through our workshops, ideas such as sports fields, incorporating more retail for a neighborhood feel, and to also be open to others. We've even heard things like an art center might be a consideration. So overall, the project goal is to establish a specific plan that creates a neighborhood or comprises of a few small neighborhoods with supporting uses. Throughout our work, and still in the context here of existing conditions, we've taken a deeper dive into really understanding everything that's around us. And so you'll see here as identified, there's several, we're nestled within the golf course, but we're adjacent to several multifamily and single-family neighborhoods. Across the street on Harbor, we have a retail commercial center. It's thriving right now with the addition of the Northgate Gonzalez Market. And then we have nearby educational or institutional uses with the high school and community college and even a church. We're also looking a lot at circulation and getting a lot of feedback about how people will come to and move through the site. There's multimodal access coming up to it, but as you can imagine in its prior use, coming through and around and integrating into the Fairview Developmental Center wasn't a desired connection point. So we really have the opportunity now to start to look at how bicycles, pedestrians, and other multimodal access points could help our new neighborhood to thrive. We've been hearing over and over again that people want more trails, sidewalks, and connections to get out and have opportunities for active open space. The site itself is rather large at 158 acres. We do have some additional considerations there as laid out on the screen before you. We start to look within the boundary, state-provided boundary at 121 acres. When we take out the area known or designated currently for the Emergency Operations Center, we're then less a potential of those 15 acres. Once we remove Merrimack Way and the properties on Mark Lane, which are expected to remain as they will continue to serve the developmentally disabled community, we're left with approximately 99 acres to plan for. And when we apply the target number of units, we would be looking at somewhere around 23 dwelling units per acre on average. Now, when we start to also look at other things like open space considerations, roadways, and some of those other multimodal connections, that unit per acre will likely be higher. So I'd like to transition here. As I was defining earlier, the project itself is a specific plan. It's a document. It's something that will probably come before all of you for implementation over the years. The city has several, but this is probably one of the largest ones, or will be one of the largest ones, and very new. We'll apply a lot of our newer best practices to it. So you want to think about the specific plan in the way that it's similar to zoning. It's going to provide an additional layer of planning and local land use control. We'll have detailed standards and design direction that will take into consideration things like adjacency, to the golf course or this emergency operations center. As you can see here, this is an established regulatory document by the California Government Code, and there is a requirement for it to be consistent with the city's general plan, and so that's why you'll hear us referencing back to the housing element several different times, because it's really an implementation tool of the general plan. And we'll provide conceptual plans then, not only for land use, but for mobility, infrastructure, phasing and financing, and the administrative processes and procedures, which will come back to the city as those development applications actually come in. We're moving along at quite the speed here. Apologies, I'm delving right into our long-term project process.
We like fast, so
Okay.
You're doing great.
All right, excellent. So you can really think about this project in 4 phases. We are in phase 1 right now. We're in community visioning. We, as I mentioned, kicked off in the fall. We have had a series of 3 different workshops. Actually, the last one was open houses. And our goal right now is to create the vision and guiding principles, at least you'll hear me talk about that a little bit more, but a working draft of those to really help give us a North Star and a guiding point as we start to pull the document together. We're obviously, as you got in the past few slides here, reviewing existing conditions, and we're just now going to be exploring land use alternatives. Once we get through those alternatives, which would be coming back to all of you likely in a study session, and also a large community outreach process involving another series of workshops, we'd be moving into phase 2 then of drafting the plan. That's likely to start late this year. And that would also kick off the environmental impact report once we have a project description that's ready and stable for us to study. We then would move into phase 3 towards the end of 2025, and that involves approving the plan, so coming before Planning Commission to provide input, and City Council then to approve and certify and adopt the plan. And then we're thinking about phase 4 really as implementation. We're looking out to 2026 and beyond, and that master developer that I referenced earlier would be beginning to build out the area. They would be responsible for complying with the specific plan, but also anything to do with, remediation that needs to happen and other agreements throughout the specific plan process. And then, as I mentioned in the last slide, one of the things that the document itself covers is the administrative process. And so that's this last bullet here about coordinating with the city to provide those necessary permits. all of that is tailored and laid out in the specific plan document as to how that will be done. All right, so we have had a lot of community outreach over the past several months. I'll walk you through a little bit of where we started and how we have even adjusted it since we've started. So community, as these line up in, not directly in the phases, a lot of these are really mostly in phase 1 as I was describing, but I've broken that out a little bit further as you can see here on the screen. Community workshop number 1 focused on the vision and guiding principles and obtaining input for that. Community workshop number 2, we came back with a draft for the community to review, and we also started working through some land use framework options, setting the stage for some conversations about land use alternatives. We then held a series of open houses, which are, you could also think of as workshop number 3, continuing to gain more community input and really giving everybody a chance to learn more about the project itself. And then our future workshops will be on the land use alternative and another one when we have a complete draft ready to go out to the community. There will also be additional opportunities for community input through study sessions such as this evening or the one that we had in December with City Council. And then the CEQA process for the environmental impact report also has additional touch points there. As you can see here on the screen, we have a couple other ongoing methods of outreach, stakeholder interviews. Those have both been with community members and members of the development community. We've been maintaining a project website, keeping it up to date as we've been moving through each of these workshops and outreach touch points. There are overviews and summaries available there. The city has also been actively posting on all of its social media, and we'll be kicking off online surveys with our land use alternatives, starting with that next series of workshops. So workshop number 1, I'm going to dive in and just tell you a little bit more about what we've been hearing and how each of these series of workshops is conducted. So we have been holding 3 workshops in relatively, as close together as possible. They're not necessarily in consecutive days, but we've been doing one evening in English, one evening in Spanish, and a third option by Zoom in dual language, both English and Spanish. You can see here, these were held, the first workshop series in early November. And this is where we were focusing on the vision and guiding principles, asking the community, what are the ingredients for a great neighborhood? We had an activity, a small group activity, where people sat around the table and gave us some more of that input. And you can see some of those in the photos and comment cards posted. The vision exercise itself gave us some great key takeaways. As we heard from the community, they're really in support of housing being that priority use, but see opportunities for the civic and community services, as well as open space and an opportunity for, really a new and unique perspective on mobility, parking, and transit here. Specifically, as you can see there, we heard a lot about affordable housing, making sure that we're balancing traffic impacts. People were very receptive about not just providing the housing, but also making sure we have services available to support the people that would be living here through childcare, job center, medical clinics, thinking about things of that nature. I touched on the mobility connections, and then it's also noted, and we do have an arborist report that will support us in this project as well, preserving some of the large trees on site if possible. So the outcome of the workshop was the draft vision statement and guiding principles. And I believe you received a copy of the revised version of that in your packet this evening. And so I'm just going to walk you through a little bit of that, but also want to note here that the vision statement is not final. It's something that we call a working draft, and as we continue to engage more with the community, we'll refine it as we move along in this process. But we have a couple building blocks that we're really using to help steer us for the specific plan and the project as a whole. And the connections in Costa Mesa, you can see in the box in the middle there, are really important and something that we're hearing consistently. Not only is this a new neighborhood for people to live in, but it's really for perhaps existing Costa Mesa residents who are looking for a different type of housing or to get out of an overcrowded situation to have a home here in their city. And that other people who might not be looking to relocate here would still want to have a reason to come and visit this new neighborhood. So we're talking about well-connected and engaged neighborhoods. You can see, sustainability also being something that's extremely important to the community. We want to be able to provide legacy development and things that are for future thinking for future generations. We want to reduce the reliance on automobiles. We want it to be a one-of-a-kind living environment. All of the things that you see here, we're taking that input, we're noting it down, and we're continuing to revise the draft vision statement as we move forward. We then had workshop number 2, where we brought that vision statement and got more input from the community at this workshop series. And this is where we also started to introduce the land use frameworks that I mentioned earlier. This series of workshops happened at the end of January this year. I should also note that and I apologize, I didn't point it out earlier, we have been increasing in participation through each series of workshops. So I think we were somewhere around 114 participants in the first. We had about 129 participants during the series of workshop number 2, and then you'll see when we get to 3, we increased even further. Again, we held it in the same format with English and Spanish, and did more of a large room presentation, and then did some polling as we started to work through the land use frameworks. So similar to the last overview I had for you, I've got some key takeaways. Again, we're hearing a lot of support for housing in that second round of workshops. The importance of looking and at the capacity for the infrastructure, and not only this time we were hearing traffic, but also, access, and then wet infrastructure, water, storm drain, and things of that nature. The site itself, as we've been going through our existing conditions learning, does not rely on city utilities. They are self-supported, and so we'll need to make sure that the right types of infrastructure improvements are there to support them.
Would you mind repeating that real quick about city services, just real quick?
Sure. Okay. So the Fairview Developmental Center currently has its own generators for electricity. They have their own on-site water storage and capacity for that. And Karen might have to jump in to jog my memory, they aren't using city utilities.
Not water or sanitary? And I'm not going to put you on the spot. You can come back to that later.
Yeah, let's come back to that.
We can come back to that.
Thank you, I appreciate that. In this workshop, we also had a member of the Cal OES, the State Department of Offices of Emergency Services, thank you, who came Mr. Ferguson came to speak to the community about that future emergency operations center, and he also verified for us that a helipad would not be constructed on site. He gave a presentation at all of our workshops. During the land use framework exercise that we gave, we gathered input, and most of the community really liked option number 3 that you see on the screen there, or some type of a future plan that might feel like that, looking at integrating large and small open spaces and thinking about, perhaps a grid concept or a concept that makes it easy and walkable for the neighborhoods. We also received feedback and have gotten several markups on ideas for the vision statement and requests to define or refine some of the terms used in the statement itself. We're continuing to take that input. In fact, hopefully tonight we'll generate some ideas with all of you. So the outcome here was that revised draft vision statement that you have in your packet, and then input for these land use alternatives that we're going to be moving forward with over the next few months. Then our last round of, the most recent round of outreach that we conducted were the open houses. Those occurred just over the end of February and earlier this month. Again, same format. Well, no, actually, we had the 3 workshops, but they were all dual language so that people were able to attend and we could maximize all of the city's resources to really increase participation. And you can see in this one, we have 176 participants over those 3 evenings. The open house format itself offered 5 stations for people to move about at their own pace and interest. The stations were overall project information, input and an exercise about the vision, housing, mobility and traffic, and site design and open space. You can see I've got a couple more key takeaways for you for this one as well. And project information, we really just heard from people, again, echoing that housing is needed. It's needed now. You know, how soon can this be built? When can we do this? You know, a lot of excitement around the fact that there's a huge opportunity here. We had some great little business cards to hand out with QR codes on our website and things, and people just want to be able to stay connected to the project. They want to know, you know, how they can get updates and timelines, how we'll be moving forward, things of that nature. So we really added also to our email list. I think we sent Paivon a huge Excel file last week, which was amazing. At station number 2, our vision statement, we really heard from the community that, you know, they have this desire for open space and recreation, as well as balancing, again, housing, a lot of ideas for senior supportive housing. At the housing station, and you'll see some of this when I transfer over to Karen, and she'll walk you through a little bit more of this presentation, but we had several different housing product types up that people could get familiar with. You know, if you're talking about a townhome or a courtyard or apartment buildings, what do those look like, and what kind of preference do people have? Again, you can see here a lot of people were in favor of traditional styles and really wanting to prioritize affordable housing. In traffic and mobility, I previewed for you earlier, one of the #1 things we're hearing is walking trails, multi-use paths, and then we're hearing both ends of the spectrum. Make sure you provide enough parking, as well as maybe consider we don't need parking here. So we're gathering all of that input. And then in station number 5, we had the site design and open space. The priority use overall overwhelmingly was sports fields, whether it be for soccer or baseball. We had representatives from AYSO and the pony leagues, all of them eyeing, you know, a certain corner where they would love to see more availability for their players. So the outcome of this workshop was input for the land use alternatives and, of course, overall for our specific plan. So I previewed for you that Karen's going to be talking to you about some residential product types. I'm also going to let her take the lead here on the economic and market study as well. Thank you.
Good evening. All right, so now we're going to move on to a deeper dive into land use in general. We're also going to talk about the market today and the market looking forward. And we're going to talk a little bit more about a future master developer and financial feasibility. All of this is intended to really set the stage for us to come back and talk about land use alternatives. So as Suzanne mentioned, we have spent a considerable amount of time with the community talking about the range of housing that could very well get built here. So we had large boards associated with each of these broad housing categories. We've got single family, attached and detached. We've got courtyard housing, whether that be motor courts or green court housing. A variety of multifamily products are out there these days, and some of those could also be in a mixed use configuration. We also showed them an interesting product that is being built. It's a condo product in a multifamily, not multifamily, but it's in a flat scenario where you've got one unit above another with tuck-under parking. And then we've got a wide variety of townhome products that are getting built today. The world of housing types is very, very exciting as everyone continues to try and find ways to build quality housing for quality of life with less and less land. It's also important to note here that as part of this project, we did initiate conversations with potential master developers, just having that initial meet and greet, let them know about the project. That is part of the agreement between the city and the state to make sure that we try and maximize the interest in this property. Our goal was to find out what the housing trends are, where they see housing going, so we could be thinking ahead about that, and also to answer questions about this process. We took the information on the boards and just summarizing it here for you. Each of these housing types differs in terms of the units per acre, number of stories, typical ownership, whether it's for sale or apartments, open space configurations, how sometimes they can include private open space, sometimes common open space, sometimes both, typical parking conditions, and other kinds of options. In our conversations with the community, we're focusing more on building form and style rather than density, because the same building could have a different density. It all depends on how it's carved up on the inside. So, and we've gotten a lot of great feedback. As Suzanne mentioned, there's strong support for affordable housing. There's lots of questions about whether or not this site could actually handle more than the 2,300 units. Then in terms of the type of housing themselves, there are people that are interested in seeing high rises so that there can be more open space. And so those kinds of trade-offs are going to be evaluated in the upcoming alternatives. All right, let's move on to the topic of economic and market considerations. Our scope includes a couple of things that's really intended to inform the specific plan. The first is a market study, and where we looked at both residential and non-residential market potential. And then the second was beginning to look at financial feasibility from a developer's perspective. At the end of the day, we have to make sure that the specific plan that we put forward to you all to adopt is financially feasible so that you get master developers that will come on board and see it through. So as Suzanne mentioned earlier, the specific plan really does set the stage for implementation. And it does that because it sets limits to what can happen, it sets expectations for what's expected, and it also sets other kinds of requirements that have financial implications for the master developer. So our overall goal as a consultant team here is to ensure that we prepare a specific plan that is desirable to build, meaning you have multiple master developers wanting to come forward and build this. It works financially, and it best addresses the vision of the community. You know, think of this as a Venn diagram. You know, we're trying to hit that target. So from a market standpoint, this probably doesn't come as a surprise, but there is plenty of demand for all types of housing in this city across all income levels. And that demand is generated not only from people who want to move to Costa Mesa because it's a desirable place to live, but it's also generated from your current residents that are either ready to fly the coop and start their own lives and start their own families, or perhaps those are already living in crowded conditions. It should be noted overcrowding and overpayment is more prevalent in Costa Mesa than other communities. Going forward, as we're thinking about development standards for the specific plan, we're starting to plan for and consider the fact that demographically, there will be fewer new households with families. And we also are expecting an increase in residents age 65 and older. That's not to say we shouldn't be planning for families, but that's just the demographic trend. In terms of non-residential uses, there is an overall desire that this project not just be housing, but have some supportive commercial retail uses. Because the site is so isolated, you can't see anything from harbor, especially if you were having one-story commercial anywhere within the project, you wouldn't be able to see it. We wanted to analyze what the project itself could support in the way of retail uses. So we've done that, and lo and behold, very good news, the site does support retail and commercial services up to 55,900 gross square feet, and that would include specialty food stores, health and personal care businesses, perhaps a pharmacy, small restaurants, eating places, that kind of thing. And then in addition, we looked at other kinds of non-residential uses such as office, dental, veterinarian, real estate office, fitness, sports, hair, nails, all of that to some degree could potentially be located here. Moving on to the topic of affordable housing, I've got to say that that is the #1 question we're asked. Who is eligible for affordable housing? And then how soon will it be available? So let's talk a little bit about the affordable housing component of this project. As Suzanne mentioned, there is a 40% inclusionary requirement here for low and very low. This slide gives you an idea of how that translates into the income limits that a family of 4 would have to earn in order to be eligible. For information purposes only, we're showing you what the acute low income level is, and this is in the County of Orange in 2023 for a family of 4. The extremely low, and then you have the very low at $71,750 a year. They would be able to qualify, and then the low income at $114,800, and then the moderate income, which is all the way up to $153,000. That gives you an idea of the income levels that would be qualifying. In addition, to the right, what you see here are the top 25 occupations that we were able to get from one of the affordable housing developers in Orange County when they have been doing recent surveys of the occupations of their projects. So you can see here, these are the folks that are living in their projects, and that can come from a banking industry, a chef, a cook, a manager, a teacher, childcare provider, a whole host of professions that we all need in our communities. A little bit more information on this topic. The income levels I just showed you translate into a housing payment for a family of 4. So you've got the very low income that can afford a maximum rent of $1,500, low income, and then the moderate income number is shown there as well. And then for purposes of for sale, we've identified what the maximum affordable purchase price could be, and you can see that on there as well. We also spent some time sharing with the community the nature of affordable housing today. It is not what it was, in the 1960s or the 1950s. These projects are as well designed with quality materials as any market rate project that you will find out there. These just happen to be 3 of them in Orange County. And I will tell you that in order to get affordable housing built, it takes multiple funding sources to make these happen. So now we're going to move on to the topic of financial feasibility. As Suzanne mentioned, the state is anticipated to be releasing an RFB, a request for bid, for the purchase of this property, hopefully sometime this year. That was initially what they said. And so we're fully expecting a master developer to come in, and hopefully more than one, and make a bid for the property based upon the specific plan. So a master developer would be the entity that would take control of the whole property and then be responsible for the financing of the development, the demolition, the remediation, all the backbone infrastructure, and then depending on who they are, they may then decide to bring in affordable housing developers. And that's very typical. There's a few large-scale developers that have an affordable housing arm, but most don't. So it's very likely you're going to have a developer that does all market rate, bringing in one or two or more affordable housing developers to do the affordable component. And then in addition to that, they may choose to also sell or lease land for the non-residential uses. As part of this project, and as part of the next stage where we're preparing land use alternatives, we're going to be doing a deeper dive into financial feasibility and evaluating whether or not the alternatives are financially feasible for a developer to take on. And we'll be reporting that out to you all. And we're doing that as a way to ensure that ultimately the preferred plan is something that can be financially feasible. So as part of that, I just wanted to give you a quick overview of what we'll be looking at. We'll be identifying the cost assumptions. This is what a developer has to anticipate doing: purchasing the property from the state, paying for demolition and remediation of the site. And when I say demolition, it's not just above ground, it's underground. And then the remediation is the asbestos, the lead, and any other contamination to the soil. Developers would also be paying to install all the backbone infrastructure that would be required, all the roads, the streetscape, sewer, water, storm drain, all of it. They would also pay for building trails, the public open spaces, and the parks, as well as dedicating that land. They would also be donating the land for affordable housing sites. Essentially, an affordable housing developer wants a perfectly graded pad with all of the infrastructure ready to tie into. And they typically get the land donated to them. So that would also be expected. Developers going to pay for then, of course, constructing the market rate units and potentially the non-residential as well, unless they choose to bring in another commercial developer to do that component of it. Developers also then going to pay for all the soft costs. That's what we call the design of the project, the engineering, the entitlements that are going to be involved between now and when it's completely built out, all the impact fees, interest on loans, et cetera. And then the question is, what other community benefits is the developer going to be expected to pay for? So we're starting to get our arms around all of that, and you'll be hearing more. So then we're also going to be evaluating the potential revenue stream. This is it. The developer then receives revenue from rents and or sale of homes, the homes that are market rate, revenue from the sale or leasing of commercial or other non-residential space. So all of that is to pay back the costs associated with the development. And just in terms of timing, and this is really important because it affects costs, the revenue first goes to pay off the construction loan. Then it goes to repay the equity investment. So it's not just the developer's equity. There's other equity investors that have come in to make this possible. And then the remainder after that is the profit, the reward for the risk. All of this has implications for the specific plan and really tells us as the folks that are going to be drafting it is that we need to provide flexibility. This project is going to be built over a long period of time, and it's going to be important that your future master developer have the ability to make some adjustments to the marketplace. We don't want them not being able to provide a new housing type that might meet some really critical demand, like the missing middle, or like the luxury market. You have the potential of having a bit of a luxury market here if we can, carve that out in a way that works for your master developer. So If it's all right, I'll move on to the next steps and we can open it up to discussion. As we mentioned, we're moving forward with 3 land use options, and we'll be doing the analysis on those, so we'll be able to come back and share the traffic impacts, talking more about water, sewer, storm drain impacts, and how that can be accommodated based upon your existing conditions off-site, the capacity of each alternative, the capacity of the non-residential, the various open space amenities between each of the alternatives, the pros and cons, the trade-offs, as I was mentioning earlier, and of course, financial feasibility. And then we're going to have a 4th workshop where we're taking those alternatives to the community and getting their input as well. And we'll have a survey online where they can weigh in. And then we'll be having a planning commission and city council update or study sessions to share all of that with you and then get your feedback on a preferred plan.
As mentioned, we're moving then into phase 2 after those land use alternatives. Once we have that project description ready to go, we'll be able to draft both the specific plan document and the environmental impact report. And you'll continue to see, this slide and where we're at in the various phases of the project as we move forward. So now it's your turn. You've heard a lot from us. Thank you for your patience.
Ladies, thank you very much for the presentation. That was thorough and fantastically executed, so thank you. Colleagues, if you have any brief questions, feel free. Jump in. Commissioner Andrade.
So I really appreciate the breakdown on affordability and if it's a worthwhile investment for our future potential developers. And then also, I really appreciate also the commentary on kind of responding to the community's feedback. I got the opportunity to attend the first one, had a conflict with all the others that followed subsequently. But it's really great to hear that, you guys are hearing what the community said, which is we need housing and how soon can you get it up? So that's really great. So is there an opportunity, so considering that the revenue, the profit-making opportunity, is there an opportunity to increase the affordability percentage? I think you estimated around 40. Is there an opportunity to extend that? I don't know if it's maybe by utilizing those town hall multifamily flats or units that maybe go up higher, 7 floors or something like that, to allow for 50% affordability across what's hopefully available?
So the 40% applies to the very low and low. When you add the moderate in, which is also subsidized to some degree, as you saw,
yeah,
that overall percentage for the whole project is 70%. So it's already at 70%. Having said that, we'll have the financial model and we'll be able to know whether or not that can be increased. We can play with that and we'll know.
Kind of adjust the levers.
Exactly.
Just a bit. Yeah, especially it was quite sobering once you provided a clear number on what the average salaries are for individuals. Just when I thought I made my way out of the low income, I guess I'm still there. So I really appreciate that, because again, it's a huge, especially I'm sure you saw that across all the community outreach, that's a key need. And then, yeah, and I really do appreciate, again, the consideration. I really love those samples on what those housing opportunities, the flats, I mean, they look absolutely beautiful. You're absolutely right. Affordable housing nowadays looks very different. And yeah, I clearly recall one of the comments in the breakout sessions is, if we go higher, right? We are a city. We were just talking about the towers that is right across from the senior center. I don't know how many floors that is. That's pretty tall. I can only imagine what does a penthouse look like at the top of that, having beach view access. So hopefully there's a great opportunity to continue to explore that, to allow us for more housing. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Andrade. Commissioner Rojas.
I do. First of all, I really appreciate your presentation. It was great. I was like, wow, okay, I've learned a lot more tonight than I've learned in the past at all. But just something that I was a little curious about, and I certainly don't mean to be a wet blanket on anything, but I always like to assess where the cracks are in certain armors because this is such a big project and you guys have done such a big job at this and it's not an easy task yet. We're just having a conversation now. But I'm kind of curious because I was reading some of the comments earlier. Some people, there's always pushback on certain projects, no matter which way you're never going to appease everybody. But have you guys gotten any, and I know it's still early in the stage, but I asked this question because I want the us to be aware of what the potential landmines are as we move forward through this project. That's really what the question is have you guys seen anything or heard any kind of feedback or pushback on the overall idea of where you're at right now? And if so, what has that been?
Thank you, Commissioner Rojas, for your question there. And I certainly, we have received input, both positive and some opportunities to improve the outreach that we've done and or some of the ideas being presented. I noted for you this evening, for instance, we've received very recently comments on the vision statement that we've yet to even have time to incorporate. So things like that we'll continue to work on and draft as we continue to receive more input. I think there has been a little bit of pushback from the community in saying that maybe a smaller subset or select group of people should be on a committee of some sort to also help advise. That we really leave that up to the city as to what direction they want to take there. I will note that we have a very aggressive timeline in order to meet state requirements for this project. As I mentioned, they're a partner, they provided grant funding, and they've also established a schedule and timeline for some of these priorities. I see Cecilia may want to chime in here as well.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. Cecilia Gallardo Daly, Interim Director of Economic and Development Services. As the team has said, we've received a lot of input and a lot of really good ideas, and the next phase is to work on some land use scenarios that support and encapsulate all of those different ideas. As part of that exercise, we'll be looking at opportunities and constraints related to those different land use scenarios, and that'll inform us a lot better as to any possible, what you call landmines, might be out there. One preliminary comment we've received in the workshops is traffic. People are concerned with the number of units and access to the site if there is only one area of ingress and egress. So that is an area that we'll be studying further. But as we develop these land use scenarios and go into more depth, we will determine whether or not there are some things that might cause us to make adjustments to what we're evaluating and what we present for your input based on those constraints.
Thank you for that. And again, we're just starting a conversation. We're not even anywhere near that. I understand that completely. I don't envy your task, but honestly, when I've seen the projects you guys are working on and all the different options that are there, it's exciting. I'm excited for it, and I'm looking forward to it. I know we're going to hit some landmines as we go through it, but we're all in this together. We're all on the same side. We all want the same thing. Even those that sometimes don't agree with what we are thinking of, it's okay, but we also want the same thing, the highest and best use of the land available for everybody to win. So I just say that again, more for public, to go on public record to say that we're all on the same team. We all want the same thing. And we just got to make the best of what we have. So that was my main question. I appreciate your feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Rojas. Commissioner Vivar?
Yeah, thank you for the very, very thorough presentation. Being somebody that doesn't drive because of my disability, and with my fiance, we've been taking public transit everywhere the past couple weeks. I can't help but think if, for example, 40% of this site will be affordable housing and potentially other affordable housing options, as Commissioner Andrade alluded to, What, if any, would the connections be, or have there been discussions for connection, like pedestrian level connections to the site, to surrounding areas, or maybe potentially discussions with OCTA on, I don't know, adding a bus stop that might be closer to maybe the frontage on Harbor or something. Just making sure that people are able to exit the site, and if the idea is to have a bit more of a private area, then yeah, possibly, I don't know, pedestrian gates or something like that. But have there been any discussions on how do we make sure that those who don't own a car because of financial reasons or disabilities or lifestyle choices, that they'd be able to access the public transit network from the site along Harbor or along other of nearby major streets that they may be able to walk to connect to existing or future transit lines.
Yes, I'll jump in here, Commissioner Bovar. I can assure you that we will be looking at making improvements to all modes of travel, and particularly ingress and egress to the site for people who walk or take transit. Completely understand that. We've been getting a lot of great input from the community. I think the graphic that Suzanne showed just portrays the site as sort of the hole in a donut. You think about the whole city and how well it's now become connected with a variety of transportation options, and yet here we have a place that's isolated. So it's a blank canvas, so to speak, and would love to continue to get your input on that.
Yeah. Like I said, yeah, I think it'd be great to, especially considering it's going to be a pretty large site, and especially as there's, from your presentation, a pretty high level of interest in affordable housing. Definitely connecting to the nearby streets on the pedestrian level. I know that Commissioner Toller likes to harp on and about pedestrian connectivity, and I think he's right in making sure that these street level connections are there. I mean, I was trying to get to Target this morning from the bus, and had a similar problem in Buena Park, where you are walking by the street as a pedestrian and you can't get to the Target. You only see the back of the Target. That's not very helpful. So in this site, seeing as it is a blank canvas, so to speak, and I won't be here much longer as well. I don't think I'll be participating in any of the future discussions about this. So I just want to make sure to get my kind of 2 cents in here before I'm gone, but making sure that there is that pedestrian level connectivity to the nearby kind of transit network, and just in general to the nearby community area, so that making sure that people can walk out of their building and take a walk, and walk their dog in the nearby neighborhood or whatnot. So just and if any of the building frontages are, any of the buildings are going to be pretty close to sidewalk. I'm not sure what kind of setbacks are going to be followed for this, but again, making sure that the buildings, if they are near a sidewalk, maybe even having those kind of street level connections that people can go out to and connect to the kind of adjacent sidewalks and transit systems and whatnot. And the other thing that I was thinking about as well, I'm not sure if this has been, again, brought up at all in any discussions that you guys have had, but especially with the site being kind of self-sustaining, I'm not sure if there's been any talk about maybe some kind of a community garden that might be serve as an on-site amenity that people might be able to, it serves to bring people together, but also to grow food that people might be able to use for the site. So has there been any discussion about that, or ideas, either for just, again, vegetables and fruit, but also just plants and nice things to look at?
I'm glad that you bring that up. We, through our last round of the open houses at the station that we had dedicated to open space, heard from a lot of community members that community gardens would be highly used and a prioritized amenity. I think they were either number 2 or 3 after those sports fields.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think
great.
that's a great idea. Thank you.
Yes, yes. And if there are any, and if any of those people who may take advantage as well, the affordable housing families, maybe having a small playground area might be a nice thing as well, with a lot of trees and whatnot. So, yeah, those are just my thoughts again before I'm gone. So thank you all for your presentation, and hopefully I've made a mark on this project. And I kick it back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Vivar. I know you're leaving soon, but I just expect you're going to be down there getting your 3 minutes every time we meet after this. Vice Chair, any brief comments?
Yeah. I say brief. I might harp on and on because of that. Okay, I have some technical questions. The helipad is gone. We got rid of that. As a result, did the developable area increase? And if not, why not? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so we did have a conversation with the Department of General Services, who's tasked with developing the Emergency Operations Center on that acreage. They did acknowledge that with the elimination of the helipad, there is the potential to reduce the overall footprint of the operations center. They said that a smaller footprint means less money, and they like the idea of spending less money on this, but it's too soon to tell. It will depend on the project design, and that process hasn't begun yet.
Okay, what about the location of that? Is that fixed?
The location is
For the
fixed.
EOC?
Yes, it is.
Okay. One thing, this is like our first shot at this, so and it already seems too late, but the self-sustaining aspects of this, that it has a generator and everything, might throw a wrench in this, but there's a disconnect between a lot of people wanting this wonderful mixed-use walkable place and the fact that it's a cul-de-sac. The whole thing's a dead end. And so there's only 2 property owners. It's the city and the state. So just like from 10,000 feet, I want to get this out of the way. There a land swap that could happen so that this developable area could be on harbor and not in a dead end? Do you know what I mean? Is that even on the table? Because would that slow everything down and mess with our deadline? I know it's a wild question, but now's the time to ask it, I guess.
Well, first of all, it's not too late.
Okay.
We're open to input, and your participation in this discussion is just as important. That has been something that has been talked about, and that is a comment that we have received in the workshops. People recognize that there could be an opportunity. It's not something that we have really explored at this level, but we're taking in all of the public comments and evaluating them as part of our development of the land use scenarios.
Okay. I'm going to save my comment on that for later then. The streets and parks that come into this, is that intended to be dedicated to the city and maintained by the city once it's all said and done? Or is that up in the air? They could remain private?
No, so once the specific plan is built out, it is anticipated that the streets and the park spaces will be dedicated to the city. The Harbor Village area where they maintain their roads are private. That's intended to be private forever.
Real quick, the 2,300 units that was assumed, I had a bunch of questions, and you answered most of them with your presentation, and some of them kind of threw a wrench in them. You mentioned that it's self-sustaining, like it's got its own water source. Is that what you said? Or?
Yeah, there's a water tower on site, and there's also geothermal for electricity. I have to double check on how they're and I don't know if Public Works is still here, if they're accessing the sewer and storm drain. And I know we requested to do some additional study of that. So we have to get you more answers on that.
Yeah, it does. So the waters from Mesa Water District is connected off of Harbor Boulevard. The sewer lines is connecting from Costa Mesa Sanitary District, and that's privately maintained.
So I don't want to get in the weeds on that, but what I'm trying to get at is what are the parameters that might limit the number of units that can go here?
Well, I think the expectation is that all of the old infrastructure is antiquated and won't work. And even its location would not work. It's all like radials out from the center, from the main utility plant. So we're going to be anticipating it's all new and connecting with the cities and other agency systems.
So there's no big hard parameters limiting this to 2,300 units from an infrastructure perspective, I guess we could say.
We haven't tested how much we could fit in there from an infrastructure perspective yet, but we will.
Unless we're talking 2 or 3 cars per unit. I'm not talking about that kind of infrastructure. Okay. Okay, just a couple more. You were careful to talk about, we have all these meetings and people have a lot of ideas and dreams and stuff, but we got to stay grounded and make sure that what we're specifying is actually feasible. So can you think of some examples of things that might end up in a specific plan like this that would cause kind of a stalemate where it's unimplementable? Like what are those minds that we in the community should be aware of that would cause this not to be something that anybody would want to touch?
Well, as someone who writes a lot of specific plans and has reviewed a lot of specific plans, I think common barriers would be to be too prescriptive in terms of design requirements, in terms of building types and other things like that. I think it is important to set quality, objective design standards as part of this, and we will certainly do that. But again, our recommendation is to really kind of provide this flexible framework and allow for it to evolve over time. But that's one example of where I think you could get stuck. So I'll just give you another example. In our conversations with some of the bigger developers, there may not be a market today for a high-rise. It's just not an urban environment. But they said, don't rule it out. It may be viable and very desirable in the future. So those are the kinds of things that we want to be thinking about now and evaluating, but that could be another example. It wouldn't stop someone coming back in and doing an amendment if they needed to, but I think the idea is to try not to have to have that happen.
Okay. That's it, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Toller. I'll go ahead and be brief. I don't need a long explanation for a lot of these things, but I just want to toss it over to you. In your presentation, there was some mention of taking into account housing needs outside of this community. Have you taken exclusive account of the housing needs within this city? And how is that reflected in the research that you've performed up to this point in effort to formulate, the draft documents?
There is a draft market study that is still being reviewed by staff. Our economists prepared it and did look at as much detail as possible in terms of the existing conditions within the city and has a lot of information about that. And so we will be taking it into account. And we can certainly, he will be here next time we come back to you all. And so we can follow up and give you a little bit more insight on that, if that's all right.
Okay, sure. So, and I'll follow up with that and saying maybe something a little tongue in cheek, but, I love California, but I love Costa Mesa even more. So if it's a matter of drilling down into the needs of this community and creating a project that actually answers the needs that we have instead of people outside of this community, I think that's something to pursue, at least pedagogically or theoretically, as this moves forward. I appreciate all of the outreach that you've done. It's been extensive and very compacted in terms of time, so you've done a fantastic job, and congratulations, ladies. I will say, just because I didn't really see it outside of some pie charts and maybe some Excel returns, excuse me, in your presentation, but have you been implementing anything along the lines of a Likert score and then averaging people out, finding returns that we can say, yes, of these particular categories, however anything's categorized, we find that this is the highest rate of return from respondents as being the most. And along the way, so second part of the question, how do you ensure that people aren't being double counted, even if it's with their little sticky notes?
So both of those are great questions, and we have been very open with the community and just trying to get them to talk and obtain feedback and want to participate. So we haven't been very prescriptive in using a score as you've described. We have tried our best to limit how many stickers we give to people when they come. We pre-cut and give them only 3. We use only blue dots at the, now I'm giving away all my secrets, at the mobility station, and only green dots at the, other exercise at a different station. But, really it's about trying to get people to participate. And in the type of outreach we've been gaining for vision and setting the stage for these exercises, it's about that participation. Moving forward, we're going to do more an online survey that will be looking at the land use alternatives, and that will be a much more controlled survey where people will only be able to take that survey once. They will be limited on answers for those questions, because we will really be trying to drill down and help the city's community, the decision makers, make those decisions. Yeah. And it's going to be harder to move forward on an item like that versus, do you like this park or that park?
Yeah, for sure. And I can totally understand and appreciate your approach at keeping to the unstructured, semi-structured nature of the outreach. And then with what I enjoy best, which is the quantitative. So if it actually gets to that point and then we start seeing some, basic statistics, even if it's just the mean, that would be great. All right. We were talking about the rate of return over time for developers, and I was curious to know what the percentage rate of return would be after expenses for a similarly sized and situated development, if there's any kind of apple-to-apple comparison that we can make, at least. And I can understand it's really early in the process, but is there an example we can use to say they're making a 5% rate of return, 6% after expenses, something like that?
I think that question will be better answered when we have our pro formas for you,
Sure.
if that's all right.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll say too, because environmental and sustainability themes are near and dear to not only me on this board, but a couple others here on this commission and several of those who are on city council. And it's my hope that when you bring this to a joint session, that if there are some sustainability related themes that we, city, planning commission, city council can actually make some of those decisions at that point instead of tossing it over to anyone else. Okay. So if we just have some offerings there. I'll second what the vice chair said in terms of the land swap. I think that that's an idea worth pursuing, so I'll just second that notion. And then maybe when it comes to, it doesn't have to happen now, but during the City Council Planning Commission joint session, some discussion about additional ingress and egress, whether that's separate ingress egress for the EOC or additional ingress egress for the site. And any potential impediments on the planning side of why we may or may not be able to pursue that course. And with that, I think that those are all my questions for now. I'll move things along. Does anyone else want a second bite before we move on? Okay, all right. I will now open the public comments. If you'd like to speak to this item, please approach the podium and you'll have your typical 3 minutes. And at the 1 minute mark, you'll hear a chime and then it'll automatically cut you off. I promise it's not me cutting you off. So yes, sir.
Abbott, City Costa Mesa, 2776 Bluebird Circle. I wear 2 hats. I also am a board member of Innovative Housing Opportunities, which is a affordable housing developer. We're interested. We know we'll need to compete. That competition will happen in 25 or 26 when you've got the master developer. So, and that competition will take care of itself. It always does. But what I want to talk about tonight was, and you touched on it, I think, a land swap, the Emergency Operations Center. Because I talked to the state rep when he was there, and I have to say it was a robust discussion, each one of the two, and we had whiteboards all around and bubbles and ideas. So it was good. It was a nice, robust discussion. But I did talk to the state rep about a land swap for the EOC. He described it as sort of an office/industrial chain link fence type property. And I asked him, maybe I've got that a little wrong, but anyway, I asked him if he'd be open to a swap. Let's find a property in a suitable location, and we can probably do it in a cost-neutral way or maybe even a cost-advantageous way, because this is, you know, retail and residential, and some open space. But I think there's an opportunity here either to be cost neutral or cost advantageous to make this a better project and put that EOC in a different location. He was open to the idea, and he said he would take it back to his team, but we'll know when we know. But at least he's open to the idea. So that's what I wanted to talk about here in the planning phase. Is looking for an opportunity to take that 15 acres, and maybe they've reduced it, but see if we can put it in a different location and then make this a full 100 and whatever acre opportunity that it is. So it's a great idea, I think, and I can give you some additional information on how it's been done. I've seen it done in other locations. So, thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. Yes, Mr. Humphrey.
Thank you, Commission, pardon me, Jay Humphrey, Costa Mesa resident. To the idea of a land swap to maybe there's a closer to the home land swap that can be worked out. And I think I agree with that process of getting better use of that whole land process. But my comments really fall on a couple of different things. First off, it's not just 2,300 units, it's a minimum of 2,300 units. And I think everybody needs to be aware of that because their own slide says a minimum of 2,300 units. So if we're thinking about densities and everything, we need to think about also what part of the land is never going to be developed as opposed to, and as part of that, so you can make that determination. I'm concerned about public input, and there's not from lack of trying. I understand it's difficult to get people to turn out. It's difficult to put it in a format that people can actually be in discussions, but we have stakeholder interviews and stakeholder meetings all over the place. And stakeholders are basically, in my understanding, are affordable housing advocates, are BIA builders, are sports field advocates, sports utility advocates, and what have you. But there's no stakeholder for the residents that are going to be in the community. And the reason it's different is there's no real discussion in community meetings. You get, like now, I'm going to get another minute in part, but when you're in those kind of meetings, you are not in a discussive process. You're really pretty much in a receive comment, but not actual discuss to find out whether there is possibility of germination of ideas that might change the path that you go on. And so without that, and from what was just said earlier this evening, the likelihood of a resident or a group committee being formed to deal with this, seeing how that likelihood has now been kind of pushed down, I look at that process as being a way to have discussion within the community with the people who are developing the plans. I'm not trying to say that it should be the community's view only that gets included, but what I am saying is that the discussion is necessary as opposed to simply input. Some kind of discussion that actually works for everybody. It's really important to keep in mind that that discussion helps us avoid things like
Thank you, Mr. Humphrey. Does anyone else in chambers wish to speak to this item, new business item? All right, seeing none. Anna, if we can move on to Zoom first. For those on Zoom who wish to speak, you can use the raised hand option, please.
Richard Huffman, you may provide your public comment.
Mr. Huffman, welcome.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, commissioners. The outreach process to engage the residents, in my opinion, was superficial and too abstract. Most people don't even know what a specific plan is, let alone what they would like to include in it. I would suggest a program of educating the public about planning issues by providing some completed specific plans as examples from different cities and counties that achieved a good result. Then they would know the goal of the process that they have been invited to participate in. The consultant's draft plan should be presented at the beginning of the process, not at the end, so that the public can make comment on concrete proposals rather than wondering how their wishes would be realized in an actual plan that they can see on paper. Everyone wants a safe, livable environment, but show us what that looks like. The best way to involve residents beyond the typical surveys is through an advisory committee that is guided by a professional urban planner that is well-versed in our city and the issues pertinent to this site. The last extensive rezoning and planning in Costa Mesa back in 2006 was the West Side overlays to spur residential development in that area. An advisory committee was used in that case, which resulted in a plan for live, work, and mixed-use redevelopment. The Fairview Development Center deserves the same kind of attention to achieve a result that reflects the concerns of the residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Huffman. Next on Zoom.
Cynthia McDonald, you may provide your public comment.
Ms. McDonald, welcome.
Good evening, commissioners. I sent you an email earlier today. I hope you had time to read it. I had a bunch of comments prepared, but after what we saw this evening, I'm just going to wing it here. You got a really good presentation from staff and the consultants tonight. Too bad the residents didn't get that same presentation at the outreach meetings. I'm sure that you learned a lot. I know all this stuff because of my job history, but I've been answering questions, fielding questions from residents who don't understand it. And this is really where the problem lies with the outreach. First of all, after reading a comment from another resident that there's no mention in the agenda about stakeholder meetings, that's correct. There were stakeholder meetings in October of 2023. We need to have the meetings, the names of the attendees, any associated materials entered into the record. The same goes with the meetings with the master developers. Those are not confidential. It does not relate to a specific transaction. So, back to the problems with the outreach. This is nowhere near what other cities have done for outreach or visioning. And I realize there's been a loss of institutional knowledge within City Hall over the past 8 years. But so far, this project lacks engagement of the public I've never seen before in Costa Mesa. Even most of the meetings for the general plan update in 2016 were better attended, despite there being a hostile climate between the city council and the residents. This attempt at determining the visioning for the community isn't working because we're not following the characteristics of what makes good public outreach. Things like clear communication, transparency about what the city's intentions are, engagement and participation, encouraging two-way communication by seeking feedback and input from the public. Online surveys don't allow for dialogues. This isn't something that should be reduced to a math equation. And in terms of that land swap, yes, that land swap came up long ago. The property in Tustin that the state owns, they could swap that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McDonald. Next on Zoom.
There's no one else.
All right, how about telephone? Star 9 for those who are on telephone.
There's no one on telephone.
All right, thank you very much. I will now close the public comment portion of the new business item. And before we go on to motion this, again, I want to give my colleagues an option to follow up on anything that may have come to mind during public comment. I know one thing did for me. Director Dropkin, do you want to?
Yeah, just one comment before the end of this review. We want to mention that we'll be providing you a PowerPoint presentation copy, and we'll also be posting it on the web.
Okay, perfect. That's great.
That's it.
That's great. Thank you, Director. I think for me, there has been some discussion as of late about the formation of a citizens advisory committee to oversee some of this work. And to be totally honest, I couldn't think of anything more redundant. I think it's some folks want to be heard in this process, our neighbors, our citizens here in Costa Mesa, and I applaud them for wanting to take part in this. But I think between multiple outreach meetings where you can interface with the consultant and a whole bunch of our city staff, we have planning commission meetings of which we have now received our first presentation. You have city council meetings where you can make public comment. And if anyone wants to speak, you can call me on my cell phone, 714-423-0578, if you'd like to talk about this. So I don't think it's for a lack of engagement. I think that the city and the consultants are doing a great job of actually reaching out into the community, and just like anything else, you improve on that through time, like we all do as professionals. I know new information is coming in, but back to the point of a citizens advisory committee, to me it seems like it would just sandbag the process and keep us from moving forward on meeting our deadlines. So I do not support that. Does anyone else have any further thoughts? Vice Chair.
Yeah, is now a good time to be sharing our thoughts on this?
I just made a general comment, yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean about us. Should we be using this time to help shape the next step, take it forward? Does staff and the consultant want to hear what we think about this project so far?
Yeah, why
Or
not?
is-
We're
or is it just
in that
questions?
we're in that gray area before we go to a motion. So I think now's your moment for a next step if you want it.
Is the can another question like that? Is the motion gonna be
Receiving
something like just keep moving forward?
receive file.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna share some comments. May I share some
Sure,
comments?
please, Vice Chair.
Here's what I think about the Fairview Developmental Center. We got hundreds of pages of summary of those workshops, and I attended one of them. And the theme I found was open space. People love open space. And it's cool to hear Americans open to the idea that you can have open space and density at the same time in the same place. And trails, open space, walkability, bikeability, but also flats and affordable living. So like, it sounds a lot like what you see Europe doing. You don't see that you don't see idyllic, naturalistic open spaces and density at the same time in a lot of these big projects in California. I think this is a big opportunity for us to push the envelope in terms of that kind of vision I just kind of tried to summarize, and try to get something different than think of the other big projects. There's River Park in Oxnard. I don't know if you know about that. Playa Vista, Tustin Legacy, or whatever Irvine's doing. They're okay. They're cool. They're as good as Southern California can do. But I think now is Costa Mesa's shot to do kind of a greenfield development. And I would keep things feasible, right? But also push the envelope in terms of these things that people say they want. So what I think that means is an emphasis on the quality of a soft public realm. That means not red curbs and asphalt crisscrossing this new site, but textured pavement, decomposed granite, integrated stormwater infrastructure, things like that. Few cars, slow cars, cars as guests in these new rights of way. Shared parking schemes for these new developments. So that to me rules out tuck under. I saw tuck under, small lot subdivision. Those are ways to cram in units and space and onto lots that were kind of designed for other things. But we got a clean slate here, and I feel like those are kind of second tier. We don't need to do that. We don't need a space, a parking space associated with each unit. I think that really can compromise overall design of neighborhoods. So shared parking schemes, car share programs, parking maximums even. I've found two instances in my research of Costa Mesa's history of the vision of a green belt extending from Back Bay and arcing across the city over to Fairview Park, and this is a big part of it. This is a big part of what that green belt would be, and I would hate to see that pinched off. So some sort of central greenway in that could one day, decades from now, maybe connect this thing. Could be cool. I have one, this draft vision and these guiding principles. Are these the topics for the principles? They're not the principles. Okay. I think we should err on being ambitious and be specific in them. And yeah, the last thing is talking about moving this over to Harbor Boulevard. The biggest challenge here is stitching this into the existing neighborhood physically and socially. And when it's isolated like that, it's going to be a huge challenge. So yeah, those are my thoughts for now.
All right, Vice Chair, thank you very much. I think that's good food for thought moving into the next step. I'm not sure if that's a joint session with City Council or if we're going to receive another, but hopefully that's helpful to you. And in the meantime, thank you for doing such a good job. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and entertain a motion to receive and file. Would anyone like to make that motion, please? I'll make the motion. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Rojas. I have no further thoughts. Commissioner Rojas? All right. Anna, if we could call the question, please.
That motion carries 5-0.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll move on to departmental reports, starting with Mr. Yang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No reports from Public Works.
All right.
Back to the chair.
All right. Thank you, sir. And thank you for being patient with us as always. Development Services Report, Director Dropkin.
Nothing tonight there.
All right. Thank you. City Attorney, Mr. Preziosi.
No report, Chair.
All right. Thank you. We'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Thank you for joining us. Thanks.